All right. Morning, everybody. Wow, this thing is loud. I'm Joel Dufour, owner of Earth Tools, a little business out north of Frankfurt here, and putting on a presentation on Walk Behind Tractors today. I've got Maggie Dungan, Salad Days Farm, and that's right, yes. And she's going to be co-presenting with me a little bit here. Oh my God, that's a young picture of me. So yeah, thanks for braving the cold and coming out this morning. It was a heat wave, and, it was above single digits, so that was good. Although I did wear long johns for this afternoon session, which is supposed to be outdoors, but I think that might get moved indoors, so I'm going to sweat my brains out in here. But it's okay. So obviously this is a presentation about Walk Behind Tractors. Let's have a show of hands of how many people have used a Walk Behind Tractor. Okay, so I'm preaching to the crowd here, or the choir rather. For those of you who haven't used a Walk Behind Tractor, do you know what a Walk Behind Tractor is? Okay, well, this is going to be a lot of what you already know. Anywho, Maggie, you want to say something about how your experience with Walk Behind Tractors has been?
Yeah, so I have a farm, Salad Days Farm. It's in Woodford County. I've been farming since 2015, and at the very end of 2014, we purchased our Walk Behind Tractor and implements from Joel. It's a little anecdotal story, but I'd read the J.M. Fortier book and, all self-taught farming. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get the walk behind and the, rotary plow and the power harrow and the flail mower and all that. And I thought it was amazing that, Earth Tools was here locally to me. Back then it was probably one of, I don't know, 0 that sold walk behind tractors in the US. So very fortunate there. And I remember calling Earth Tools and we just left a message, hey, we'd like to talk about them. And then my husband and I were sitting in bed that night and it's almost 8 o'clock and my phone rings and I'm like, that looks like the Earth Tools number I called. And I answer and it's Joel and he's returning my call. And I was like, you didn't have to do this late. He's like, no, I like to have everything settled at the end of the day. I hope you don't still do that. Okay. No, it was great. But yeah, we purchased a Grillo 110D. We still have it, it's fantastic. We have the flail mower, we have the power harrow. I did have the rotary plow, but we kind of stopped using it, so I gave it to some fellow farmers as a wedding present. Probably the only time in history somebody got a farming implement as a wedding present, but yeah. Oh man, I could have used that. So yeah, and I also have the soil ripper actually too. And I use those regularly on my farm for all the bed prep, mowing down cover crops, old crops, giant weeds. I will shamefully say that I don't take awesome care of my tractor. I recommend that you do. However, she always starts up. It's the best piece of equipment on my farm. Very reliable. My employees can use it, easy to teach, lightweight. I mean, I'm sure Joel will talk all about this, but from my own experience, I'm very glad that that's the path I took on my farm, to do very intensive growing. We do all diversified vegetables. It's all certified organic. And, honestly, even if I had the space for a 4-wheel tractor, we own a 4-wheel tractor, but I'd probably still go the 2-wheel tractor route, just, in terms of production. So go buy one if you don't have one.
She's not on the payroll. Well, there's what I'm not going to say, because that's not part of my slideshow. All right, everybody got that? What? What? Why is this not going into my slideshow? No. I have a PowerPoint somewhere. I mean, otherwise it's going to be a long day. Actually, I have it on flash drive here if you're unable to pull it up. But I did upload it to the website as instructed. Get the flash drive? Okay. Hey. All right. What the heck is a walk-behind tractor? But I'm, again, preaching to the choir, so I don't need to talk about this. But we'll run over a little bit of it anyway, because a lot of people might be listening to this session in the recorded fashion later, and might as well cover this. So a walk-behind tractor is kind of just what it sounds like. It's a tractor that you are not sitting on a seat and steering with a steering wheel. Your feet are on the ground while you're running this thing. It's got just one axle, two wheels. I used to call them two-wheel tractors, and that is a common term for them. But after years of saying, of people, you know, getting this blank look on their face when you said two-wheel tractor, and they would say, like a motorcycle? Like, no, the wheels are side by side. Never mind. Here, let me just show you a picture. Because of course, with the term tractor, when you're talking to Americans, everybody thinks of sitting and riding, and they just can't get that out of their heads. But a tractor by definition is just a power source for implements. The original tractors, the original four-wheel tractors, back when tractors were invented in the 1800s under steam power, the term comes from tractive, traction. Just a device to pull or push things, to develop ground traction, to do work. And this was a direct replacement for hoof stock, which had been, pulling plows and cultivators and harrows and everything else for, God knows how long. For as long as there's been agriculture, there's been people using hoof stock for agriculture. And the tractors were obviously a mechanical replacement for hoof stock. And a two-wheel tractor was the same thing. It was just a mechanical, small-scale replacement for single hoof stock. Eventually, they developed into having a power takeoff, a PTO, just like four-wheel tractors eventually developed a PTO to run implements off the back or front or whatever. And two-wheel tractors evolved at they were a little behind their four-wheel counterparts, but they were right there. I mean, some of the first two-wheel tractors or walk-behind tractors in America were in the early 1900s. I mean, the Gravely company was founded, or the first Gravely was built in 1926. And, so the concept is the same. You have one power source, multiple implements, just like a full-size tractor. So a lot of people get two-wheel tractors or walk-behind tractors or walking tractors or hand tractors. There's a lot of different terms around the world. Confused with just kind of regular lawn and garden equipment, because you look at the physical size of a walk-behind tractor and you think, oh, it's a Troy-Bilt, or it's a DR mower, or something like this, because it's that physical size. But the huge difference is that the walk-behind tractor is not only made with the type of quality you expect on a four-wheel tractor, that is a piece of agricultural equipment that's made to work for years and years, but it has interchangeable implements, unlike some of those other walk-behind brands that are rife on the market these days with disposable equipment. And yeah, walk-behind tractors are not some exotic thing that somebody cooked up on a harebrained idea. They've been a part of agriculture in the world for well over 70 years in the Far East, Europe, and much of America as well. There was a lot of American companies producing walk-behind tractors from the 1930s up until the 1970s, and a lot of them just faded away, which is unfortunate. Okay, so there's some pictures. The pictures on the left, actual walk-behind tractors. One thing you can kind of tell a walk-behind tractor by is the relative inline drivetrain, where you've got your engine power shaft going into a gearbox and pretty much directly to your implement. Everything is, oriented on this horizontal plane. Same thing on that machine. Nice low-slung engine on the front of the transmission going directly into a clutch, into a transmission, and out the PTO. So just like you'd expect on a four-wheel tractor. Kind of typical lawn and garden equipment, being cheaper and more mass-produced, typically uses belts. The engine sits a little higher than the powertrain, has belts transferring power down into the powertrain. Belts are not terribly reliable. This is also a belt drive machine, vertical shaft, belt bringing the power out to the blade. Yeah, you've all changed belts on lawnmowers, you know what a drag that is. And belts, of course, rob a lot of power. I mean, you can basically kiss about 15 to 20% of your power just right out the window through heat and friction when you're running something with a belt drive. So some implements necessitate the use of belts, but most can be shaft driven quite efficiently. So a little more history here on walk-behind tractors. Well, I've kind of already covered the first one. You know, walk-behind tractors appeared in the early 1900s as a mechanical alternative to hoof stock. And yeah, by the 40s, there were a bunch of machines being produced in the US. I mean, most of these brands are just the kind of things of the history books now. Had the old David Bradleys. There's still a few of those in circulation. Those were a very basic walk-behind tractor with no PTO. They just pushed or pulled implements. But a lot of old timers will remember the David Bradleys. They were actually private labeled through Sears and Roebuck. So if you had a Sears and Roebuck walk-behind tractor, that was a David Bradley. There was something called a Chore Master, which was an interesting machine. It had one wheel. So it was made for hillside use, and you could tilt it just like you tilt a one-wheel wheelbarrow to stay upright if you're working across a slope on a terrace or whatever. And again, that was a no PTO type machine, just push or pull. Simplicity used to make a walk-behind tractor. Aaron's used to make a walk-behind tractor. There's a few other U.S. brands. Seamar, I'm sorry, that was Swiss. Fraser's the one I'm thinking of. They were built in Indiana. There was a bunch of these machines, and this is back when, you know, in the 30s, 40s, you know, market farming, what we call market farming today, they called truck farming. And it was, you know, the farmland that surrounded a city was feeding the city. It was the way it was supposed to be. It's the way Europe has been set up for decades, millennia probably, or centuries anyway. And it all made sense. You had lots of small growers, diversified growers, using small equipment on small plots, family farms. This type of equipment made it practical and possible. Having a mechanical alternative to hoof stock meant that you didn't have to grow 10 acres of hay and harvest 10 acres of hay to feed your tractor. So it was less work. We had, you know, gasoline available, diesel fuel to run these machines. Of course, you know, people can argue that, you know, with a mechanical tractor in the barn, you weren't having that, you know, and animal companionability and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, we'll leave that for another discussion. But the fact is, it allowed a small farmer to, you know, be more efficient on a smaller piece of land. And after World War II, you know, the big push by the USDA, and everybody knows it, I'm sure, get big or get out, was the byline. So that started happening. And all those little farms surrounding the cities got converted to suburbs, which are nothing but traffic snarls today, and houses that are falling apart because they weren't all that well built. But, you know, Then it was not sexy to grow food locally anymore. Gas was cheap. We had rails that could bring it in from Mexico or California and, just buy it at the grocery store. So we saw the whole popularity of walk-behind tractors just faded away going into the 60s, 70s, and pretty much, most of them were gone by the 70s. The Gravely Company, which was based in West Virginia, was the last of the American walk-behind tractors, and they survived the longest because they actually had a PTO. They were one of the few American tractors that had a PTO. So there's a Gravely 1945. That's actually at the New York State Fair. That picture was taken. There's one of the old Simplicity tractors. There's the one-wheel Choremaster I mentioned. CMAR is one of the first companies to have a gear drive walk-behind tractor with a rear-tine tiller. Actually, it's said that Troy-Bilt actually got their ideas from CMAR. The interesting thing about the Gravely Company, they produced walk-behind tractors until 2003. And by the time they were done, they had already been bought out by the Aaron's company at that point, Aaron's just being essentially a big lawnmower company. And they, in their last few production runs at the Gravely factory, they just produced like 250 or 300 machines. That was it. They were just selling so few of these things, and it wasn't cost effective to keep the factory running anymore, so Aaron's finally just shut it down. But one of the things that kept Gravely from, surviving past that was the fact that they never innovated their product past about 1940. So it was really a shame. American ingenuity created the thing. It was one of the first PTO drive walk-behind tractors on the planet. A lot of the Italian companies that continued on and continue on till today making walk-behind tractors got their ideas from Gravely, and and then they just stopped. They stopped innovating, and one of the big things that a modern walk-behind tractor does, if you're familiar with this equipment, is that the handlebars rotate around to either side of the machine. So as you can see in these pictures, all the handlebars are in the rear, on the non-engine side, except for the Gravely. The Gravely has the handlebars on the engine side of the machine. So all these others, the later versions of these, you could turn the handlebars around to the engine end. That means your PTO was out front, or have your handlebars on the PTO end to run rear mount implements. So Gravely designed their machine with the PTO in the front. They never changed it. They never changed it. For, from 1926 up till 2003, they never changed the design. And they never made a single transmission change after about the 1940s. They were selling the same machine 60 years later, and they wondered why nobody was buying these things. And the Italians just passed them up. In the 1960s, they started with the reversible handlebar thing, which made the tractors so much more useful. Because, if you've got a mower on a machine like this, it makes so much sense to have the mower out front. So A, it's not mowing your feet off, and B, you're not driving over the material before you mow it. I mean, really, we think, full-size tractors have all these bush hogs in the back. It makes no sense. You're driving over the material, mashing it down to the ground, and then expecting the bush hog to do a good job cutting it. And then if you have to do any maneuvering or, kind of close work, you need to see the chiropractor because your head is all twisted around, seeing where your bush hog is, backing up. In Europe, almost all the four-wheel tractors have a front PTO and a rear PTO, and they mount all their mowing equipment on the front. It makes sense. So with the walk-behind tractor, we don't have a front and rear PTO, we have a front or rear PTO. But it's something Gravely never did, and they failed. It's very interesting. One more little anecdote about Gravely. After Gravely discontinued their walk-behind tractors, there was an outcry amongst Gravely users. There was, still a bunch of people wanting to use these things. There's kind of traditionalists or whatever. There's a lot of road departments, actually, that liked them for mowing. And for mowing, it was a great machine. The implement was out front. That's where it belonged for mowing. It was just, it stunk for soil working because you'd till the ground and then drive your 400-pound machine through the bed and make two big tire tracks. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. Are we good? not me. Oh. Okay, there is a white farm truck in the parking lot with its lights on.
Yeah.
And it's your battery. That's all we've got is white. But if we come up with something else. Oh, it's a farm truck. That's what it is. Oh, we have a taker. Okay. Anywho, so there's this outcry amongst Gravely owners saying, oh no, we need the walk-behind tractor back. So Gravely went to a Swiss company called Rapide, which looks like rapid, but in Europe you pronounce it Rapide. And they said they made a deal with Rapide. Rapide was making a very, very nice walk-behind tractor, Swiss built. I mean, this thing was just cream of the crop. All hydrostatic drive. It was beautiful, very expensive. And Gravely said, oh, we're going to have the nicest machine on the market. We'll rebadge it as a Gravely and we'll sell it in North America. So they brought this thing in. They made one change to it for the US market. The Rapid machine as sold in Europe had reversible handlebars, so you could run implements in the front or back like any modern walk-behind tractor coming out of Europe. Gravely said, no, our users won't understand that, so they took out that feature and made it front PTO only. I looked at that at a trade show when they first brought it in, and I said, you guys deserve to fail. And they did. 2 years later, they were done. They weren't selling Rapid anymore. Of course, part of the problem was they took a machine that sold for 7,000 euro in Europe and marked it up to where it was selling for 12,000 euro or dollars in the US. So nobody would buy these things. I mean, unless you were an absolute Gravely nut, if you had $12,000, you would go buy a Kubota. It's just way overpriced and stupid because no reversible handlebars. Duh. Okay. So here's a list of stuff. Boy, that got all weird, but anyway, that's what I get for a Word document. List of implements that can be run on modern walk-behind tractors. Most of your modern walk-behind tractors are produced in Italy. Italy is a country roughly the size of Arizona in terms of land base. They have about 14 or 15 brands of walk-behind tractors rolling out of Italy. That's pretty intense when you think about that concentration. The rest of Europe produces a bunch of walk-behind tractors as well, but nobody gets close to Italy. I mean, France has one brand, Switzerland has 2 or 3 brands, Germany has 2 brands. There's some Eastern European ones, a couple of those. Italy produces more walk-behind tractors than the rest of Europe combined. Just an interesting mix of relatively cheap labor costs there and a lot of good mechanical engineering. You've got Da Vinci, you've got Michelangelo, you've got walk-behind tractors, right? So yeah, but these can do a lot of things. I mean, what we don't have is a front loader and a post hole digger. We get a lot of requests for post hole digger, and we're actually working on one of those, but not yet. Questions? Is the power potato garlic planter new? Yeah, it's pretty new. Yeah, we just introduced it last year. I have not tested that one. We've just sold 1 or 2, I think 2. I think the one guy just bought it at the end of this season, so I don't think it's seen any service yet. The other person who bought it has had it a couple years. Doing garlic. It's a big garlic operation, and they love it. They say it's just revolutionized what they can do. The one thing with it, and we found this out, this is kind of the thing about mechanical garlic planters, because everybody wants to know, how does it orient the garlic clove up? Well, it can't. And we've looked at garlic planters that are like $50,000, and they don't orient it up either. I mean, it's just not really mechanically doable. It's something that requires a human hand to put this thing in the ground the right way. So the question then is, what happens? How does your garlic grow if it's in the ground upside down or sideways? And listening to the guy who bought one of these from us, he says they still grow. They'll just turn around in a circle and come up. He says, but you get a little uglier garlic. So what he does is he sorts the garlic, obviously, when he harvests it, and what looks nice, he'll take to the farmer's market and sell as fresh garlic. But he also sells to a processor, and they don't care what it looks like. So the uglies go to the processor. So anyway, yeah. So yeah, there's the reversible handlebars. And no, you don't have to take bolts off and turn it around. It's a pretty easy process. Depending on the brand of walk-behind tractors, we represent 3 different walk-behind tractors at the company that I run: BCS, Grillo, and Barbieri. And the procedures differ slightly between the 3, but in any of them, it's like a 2-minute process at max to turn the handlebars around. It's pretty basic. The transmission gears typically run in either direction, so you get the same number of speeds forward and reverse. So, yeah. I should talk a little about my history with walk-behind tractors. I should have done that at the beginning, but there's no time like when I remember it. So I was raised on a farm in southern Indiana, Salem, Indiana, if anybody knows where that is, kind of in the hills of the southern part of the state. And we moved from Chicago down to that farm, and Dad didn't know a whole lot about gardening, but he knew some. He grew a garden in his suburban plot that we lived in the suburbs outside Chicago. But we were part of the end of the Back to the Lander movement, and Dad wanted to get out into the woods and raise his kids, away from the city and bad influences and blah, blah. So he brought an old Rotaho tiller. I don't know, does anybody remember the Rotaho brand? I mean, it's a pretty old brand. They're out of business now, but it was this weird kind of front tine thing. It destroyed itself in like half a season because we had clay. Up near Chicago, it was all this nice black loamy dirt. And Dad thought, well, that's how dirt is. That's just what dirt is. So we got to southern Indiana. It was clay and rocks and, whatever. Just wrecked that thing pretty quick. It was just a belt and chain drive machine, so it fell apart. And Dad was going to go and buy a Troy-Bilt because you open up any Mother Earth News or Organic Gardening magazine and there's big ads for Troy-Bilt. So he was going to go and get one of those. But Dad was always the kind of guy who did a little more research. He wasn't happy just buying what the masses were buying. He drove a Toyota car way back before Toyotas were sexy in the mid-'70s. And he thought, there might be something a little better out there. So he did some more research and came up with BCS, which was being marketed by a company called Mainline at the time out of Ohio. And he looked at these things, and he's like, man, this is gear driven, it's really a well-made machine. It's got these different implements. This is really cool. And we were kind of looking for something else to do. I mean, the idea of moving to this farm was to live off the land because that's what the Back of the Landers did, right? But Dad also had this issue where I guess they didn't understand birth control because they had 7 kids, and it took a lot of food to feed those kids, and food costs money, and when, basically we needed to do more than farm because it wasn't cutting it. So Dad decided to just become a dealer for BCS. So he bought 2 instead of 1, became a dealer, first dealer in southern Indiana in 1977. And, obviously the 1 machine became our farm machine. We mowed 17 acres of hay with it. We tilled 5 acres. This was an 8 horsepower. I mean, it was a very basic machine. About the size of what's on the screen right now. That's an 8 horsepower modern BCS. And the thing just was, worked into the ground. And 6 years later, in 1983, we decided we needed a bigger walk-behind tractor. So he got a 10 horsepower diesel model at that time. We sold the first one. That first one is still in production, or it's still in use today. We put a new engine on it, resold it. The guy still has it. Transmission's never been into that I know of. It's amazing. These things are just indestructible. So the second machine, we finally wore it out by, I don't know, the early 90s or something like that, and we got another one. But yeah, I mean, we did everything with that thing. We had the lawnmower for it, we had a snow blade, we had a sprayer for it, had a hay rake, the sickle bar, of course. Yeah, just did a ton of work on that thing. And then, as I grew up not only using the machines on Dad's farm extensively, because we eventually had a little produce operation. We started selling organic produce in the early 80s. And This is before organic was sexy, so nobody knew what we were doing, and we had to convince people that it was good. People bought it just because it looked good and it tasted good. They didn't care that it was organic. They were like, what does that mean? But Dad believed in farming without pesticides and herbicides and things, so we did a lot of organic mulches and composting and things like that. And Dad had a lot of slave labor. That's what all those kids came in handy for. So we got it done for a decent budget, and sold organic produce actually in Bloomington, Indiana, for many years, which is the college town closest to us. So they actually had a little higher percentage of people who understood what organic was. Just selling in our local community, you couldn't get anything because we were just a little farm town. But yeah, so grew up using them, selling them, fixing them. I've been into these machines. I rebuilt my first one when I was 10 or 11, when the neighbor ran his out of oil. So yeah, and I've just sort of been steeped in these things. And they just, when I grew up in Dad's business, and when I was in my mid-20s, I decided that I wanted to sort of spread my wings and do my own thing. And Dad said, well, you can just take this walk-behind tractor line and just, I'll sell it to you on consignment. He says, I just use them anymore. He says, I don't know how to sell them. I'd been doing all the sales and service on them since I was 16. He's like, just take it and run. So I did. And eventually ended up in Kentucky here, where Kentucky girl brought me down here. Yay. And yeah, just sort of reestablished things down here. And then we went on the internet, and that blew the doors off everything. Because before I had just been a brick and mortar business, just selling in my local area. But now we sell all over. And the experience I've had with walk-behind tractors helps a ton of small farmers just nationwide, worldwide really. I mean, we've got customers in Australia, several in the kind of the West Indies, Caribbean area, Alaska, Hawaii. Actually do a lot of business in Hawaii. Yeah, it's pretty neat. I've even shipped some stuff to Italy, which is stupid. But there's some implements that we actually make for the walk-behind tractors at our facility. We've got into some small manufacturing because some of the implements we want to offer aren't available in Italy. There's just no Italian manufacturer making something in that class or type. So sometimes an Italian says, hey, that's cool, I want it. I'm like, the freight's going to be more than the implement. Sometimes they're willing to pay it. Yeah. Headlights on a walk-behind tractor, they're cool, but they're really impractical. Because, if you're running a front PTO implement, they're going the wrong direction. And besides that, when you change the angle, for example, if you sink that tiller into the ground, the headlights are pointing up in the air, so it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And people ask me about them sometimes. They see pictures from Europe with the headlights on them, and they're like, oh yeah, I want headlights. And I'm like, dude, just get a headlamp. Get one of these nice rechargeable headlamps, and it looks wherever you look. It's $50. Now, yeah, we're bringing in some crawler tracks for them. There's both metal, there's steel tracks and rubber tracks available, but you don't find many applications where those are practical. It has to be really, really specialized, super steep or something, super boggy ground where you really need a lot of flotation on the ground, a lot of, to reduce your PSI. So, yeah, in fact, this one here on the bottom, the guy's mowing reeds down in a swamp, and he's got big balloon tires on the thing. So those tires are like a foot wide, so they're not sinking into the ground. Maggie, you have anything to interject at any point? Feel free. Yeah, just stick up your hand if you've got a question. I mean, don't let me just run away. See something that interests you or you've got a question, just stick up your hand and say, hey. Yeah, there's the hay baler being used in that same swamp to bale up reeds. Haven't tried it for that. I don't have any reeds. We did try, some guy brought out a truckload of kenneth, which is like an alternative fiber crop, and we baled it up in the baler. That worked pretty well. The sprayer rigs here, we get these custom built in the US, and we don't even get involved really in it. There's a company in in Indiana and another company in Pennsylvania that build custom spray rigs, and they'll build them to fit walk-behind tractors. So we just basically connect anybody who's interested with that manufacturer and say, here, they'll build it to your specifications. There's just no point in us getting involved in that. It's a lot easier and keeps the cost down. I grew up as a fairly starving farmer, so I know what it's like. And we've always strove to keep our prices low to, make it as easy as possible on small farmers because, farming's not a lucrative business. It can be a good, solid living, but it's not a lucrative business. The straw chopper is something relatively new that we started bringing in. Kind of an interesting thing. You can have a self-propelled straw chopper, so it can chop straw in place and just blow it out in a pile, or you can kind of blow a windrow out of it onto the ground. It's basically made to take a typical square bale. You just drop a whole square bale into it. But we've also done loose hay, and I think what's in it right in that picture is just loose hay, because our little baler, as you could see in the previous picture, is a round baler. Doesn't make square bales. And that little round bale just doesn't fit in that thing. It wasn't made, the dimensions are not right. So if you're gonna put one of our round bales into it, you have to just break the bale down and kind of shove it in there. But it still works fine. I've actually shredded leaves in it, just fill the hopper with leaves. It'll do non-organic things like styrofoam or cardboard. It just shreds it up. Just an interesting device. Very efficient. These are a couple of the implements we build ourselves. The buck rake on the bottom there is just a bunch of tines. It's like 8 tines that slide along the ground, 30 inches long, and you just basically drive around your field that you've mowed with a sickle bar and just pile up the hay on the front. Buck rakes are pretty popular in England and around the United Kingdom. You don't really see that many people, even for full-size tractors, using buck rakes in this country, but we noticed them being over in Europe a few times, and we're like, this is a pretty neat little tool for the small-scale hay harvest person. If you can't, if you don't have enough acreage to justify the hay baler, which is the most expensive thing we sell, the buck rake is 1/10 the price and allows you to collect the hay with a lot less labor than walking around with a pitchfork. So you just, kind of shove it around the field and push it up into big piles. You can do the haystack method in your field, or then fork it into a truck to take it into a hay loft in a barn. The riding sulky for the because a lot of people will say, well, you got a seat to go on that thing, and I'm like, did you not get the walk behind part? A huge advantage of walking behind the piece of equipment is that you need a lot less room to turn it around. It's a very mobile machine. With the larger machines, anything kind of on that larger half of any of the equipment lines, they have a differential in the transmission and independent steering brakes. So to turn the machine around, you hit one steering brake and the thing will literally turn around on a dime. You can't do that if there's a seat on the back of it. With a riding sulky like this, you're making like 10 or 12 foot radius turns so you don't jackknife the thing. And of course, anytime you need to back up, you have to worry about jackknifing this, because this is a little trailer. It's hinged to the back, and it's going to try to jackknife when you back up. So maneuverability is kind of takes a lot of that away when you put the riding sulky on there. And I really enjoy the exercise. And if you've ever been to Europe, you'll see that the average weight of individuals is less. They do not have the obesity problem that we have in the US over there, and it's because they're not afraid to get exercise. They walk more, they just do a little more manual work, and probably fewer processed foods too, but it all works together. But yeah, there's just such a, it blows me away how people in this country they want, like anything, a sit-down riding mower, or sit-down everything. And then their doctor says they need more exercise, so they buy a membership at the gym and walk on a treadmill. That's stupid. Your lifestyle and your work should give you the exercise you need. If you're a farmer, you're getting it. So yeah, if you are investing in equipment for a small-scale farm, and I think Maggie can speak to this, not investing in you actually have a 4-wheel tractor already, so it's not like you were looking at the investment of either or, right?
We don't use our four-wheel tractor for anything. We don't, just on our farm, we don't use any of the four-wheel tractor for production. It is got a bush hog on it and a bucket, and it's like if a tree falls down, we move the tree on the property. So depending, maybe you own 5 acres and you're farming like 4 of it, you can go with the whole walk-behind tractor part. And you can get the tractor and the implements all for the price of what you would buy a used four-wheel tractor for. And yeah, much cheaper to repair. Not that I'm plugging Earth Tools, but they are very reasonable in their repair, whether you take it there. They're also very helpful if you call and just talk about your problem, and they'll actually talk through with you how to fix it.
Or direct you to one of our videos.
Yes, there are amazing YouTube videos of Joel you can watch all day long.
If you have no life.
He tries to make them funny. But even if you just have minimal mechanical knowledge of fixing, an engine or just a piece of equipment, you can get in there and work on it. So just in that sense, it's very economical.
Yep. And yeah, I'm not going to read everything that's up there because that's boring. And we've kind of covered that already. The cost is roughly a third of what you would sink into, full-sized equipment or, that is riding equipment. Yeah, and we talk about the hay baler several times in here, and it's interesting because when you're having a discussion with somebody who doesn't know anything about walk-behind tractors and they're sort of slowly getting the concept, and then you show them the hay baler, you show them a picture of the hay baler or a video, then their mind, you can just see boom, the little explosion go off, and they're like, man, that is a tractor because it runs a hay baler. That's always the kicker right there. So yeah, then the balers are certainly not for everybody. I mean, the baler's like 10 grand, but it's for a small scale hay operation, say 5 to 10 acres, it makes all kinds of economic sense. I mean, because it'll make a bale a minute, 50-pound bale a minute, and I'm using the first baler we brought in, which actually we sold to a customer. And then they moved around a little bit, and then it ended up coming back after they sold their farm. But that thing, it's a 2001 model, and I cannot tell you how many thousands of bales have been through that thing. I mean, I use it on my farm. We have some horses, which I don't recommend, but my wife likes them. Yeah, maneuvering. So if you're operating in a confined space because land is expensive and you buy what you can afford, right? So if you only got an acre and a half, or 2 acres, and you want to do a market farm, which is possible to do with a walk-behind tractor, at least with a walk-behind, you don't have to worry about a lot of space being designated for just maneuvering space. At the end of your rows, and if you've got to do deer fencing, which you do in a lot of our bioregion these days. If you want any food at all, you have to keep the deer out. So if you've got deer fencing and you need to worry about a four-wheel tractor being in the garden, you need 20 feet at least between the end of your beds and the fence. With a walk-behind tractor, you need 5 or 6 feet. So you can really get a lot more growing in a smaller space. Beds can be closer together. Everything can compress down. Yeah, that's about a 45, maybe a little over a 45-degree angle. That guy has sort of cleated combat boots on, which prevent him from sliding down the hill. The wheels on the machine are spiked metal wheels, keeping it from sliding down the hill. That's one of those rapid tractors I talk about, or the Rapide Swiss machine. That's in the Swiss Alps. I've watched a BCS machine equipped similarly doing the same thing. One thing you notice when you watch a guy working, I was actually in the Italian Alps watching a guy using a BCS in conditions like this, and you notice that they always turn uphill, because if you turn going downhill and the thing starts getting away from you, it just slides down the hill. So you keep that kind of momentum going upwards at all times. But yeah, they'll mow hay on ground like this, and they have the equipment to deal with it because if you have cows in the Alps, this is what your ground looks like. You don't have flat ground. There's no other option. You have to have equipment that will work with a slope like this. So yeah, it's common to run these things. I mean, in America, we don't have the population density that forces us to use land like this for agriculture. But climate change is coming, so who knows? Actually, it's here. Yeah, in the Far East. So yeah, the Chinese, the Taiwanese, the Pakistanis, the Indians, they all produce some walk-behind tractors. As you can tell from these pictures, some of them, or many of them actually, kind of follow this design prototype, very crude. So, this is just a great big flywheel on this machine here with a big belt drive running back to the transmission. No way this would get OSHA approved. You could not bring this into the US without guards over all this stuff. Some of the engines they use, I don't think this is one of them, but I don't know if I have a picture of it, but there's some of the engines that are still in production. The cooling system of the engine is just an open pan on top of the engine head. And since you're working in a rice paddy, when all water evaporates out, you scoop up some water and you put it back on the top. It's literally a water-cooled engine just by evaporation. It just boils off what's on top, and when it's gone, you put more on, otherwise it blows a head gasket. So, super crude, very cheap, and not a lot of implement applicability. Most of these things, like the rear PTO machines like these, will run the handlebars don't turn around, so it's rear implements only. They'll put like a tiller, maybe some kind of a seeder, or a cultivation tool, like just a shank-style cultivator. Yeah. They mass produce these things. They use them on a lot of the small-scale rice farms and other types of agriculture. And I wish they would build better equipment because sometimes this sort of stuff gives walk-behind tractors a bad name. I was talking with a guy. Well, I'll back up a little further. So about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I got a quote request for 300 walk-behind tractors going to Africa. And this was through a UN aid program. And they were providing, they were coming up with this money to buy more modern farming equipment for these small farmers that were using all hoof stock and manual power. So the idea was to sort of bring these people up into the modern age a little more, keep their farm size relatively the same with walk-behind equipment, not go for big farm tractors and stuff. So it was what Europe did, back in the 40s. So that was the idea. So here was this quotation for 300 walk-behind tractors. Of course, I quoted it with what walk-behind tractors we had, and I knew I wasn't going to get the bid because I could tell just by the bid specifications that it was designed around some of these Chinese machines. And of course, some Chinese company got the bid. Well, I was talking to a guy at a trade show probably 5 or 7 years later, and it happened that this guy worked for that program. And he said, yeah, that was an absolute unmitigated disaster because they bought these 300 Chinese machines, they brought them down there, and he says, within 2 years, all the gearboxes had gone out. They'd just fallen apart. They were garbage. He says the engines were actually worked, but he says the fields were full of hulks of machines where the transmission had broken down and it was too heavy to get out of the field, so they just left it there. They took the engine off and had it running their washing machine or something by their house. And of course, everybody just thought, well, walk-behind tractors are crap. So it just gave them a black eye. And I'm like, yeah, if they'd invested, some more money in good walk-behind tractors, they would still be using those things today. Anyway, more Chinese stuff. I love the expression on this guy's face. He's really serious about it. The engine on that machine pulling the cart, that is a shameless copy of a Yanmar diesel. Yanmar is a Japanese diesel brand. It's been around for a long time. The brand of that one, which is an absolute Yanmar clone, is Ramne, which is Yanmar backwards. They have no shame at all. Very interesting equipment for rice paddies up here in the top. Just neat stuff. So back to the U.S. We build the plastic mulch layers out at our place. There was a lot of interest in that 20 years ago, and we first worked with another U.S. manufacturer who was already building mulch layers and got them to do it, but they eventually, it was just too small a market for them. They got out of it, so we just picked it up ourselves. They're a pretty easy implement to build. But they're, for people who are interested in plastic culture, it's an efficient way to do it. Of course, you can do it in the field. You don't have to be doing it in a high tunnel like this picture shows. And they will put down, we've redesigned the mulch layer in the past couple of years to be able to handle paper mulches, which is nice because you don't have to worry about them, taking them up out of the field, and some of them are organic certified. They also do landscape fabrics, which you can reuse from year to year. So, yeah, I don't think there is an organic certified biodegradable mulch anymore, is there? Yeah, okay. I knew there was one years ago, and then it kind of fell out of favor. So yeah, it's still done. Yeah, and for people using them in high tunnels, we found a Canadian manufacturer that makes a catalytic converter that'll fit most of the popular engines, like the Honda engines. So if you need to use the machine in an enclosed space, like greenhouses or whatever, the catalytic converters keep the emissions down at a minimum. So you're not strangling on the fumes. Also working on an electric version. The electric, well, everything's going electric these days, of course. And we've been fielding requests for an electric walk-behind tractor for probably about 10 years. And we were actually working with a company in California, Solectrac, who builds electric four-wheel tractors. And we had a partnership going with them, kind of a technology sharing thing. I was helping them with the design of coming up with a walk-behind tractor. And unfortunately, the company is done. They were bought up by some big Indian firm, and they did one of those pump and dump things and blew up the company stock, dumped it, and the whole thing crashed and burned. So Solectrac is gone. That whole design is just rubble. So we're back to the drawing board. Really sucked. I had nothing to do with that, but what a disaster. Anyway, BCS is actually working on an electric walk-behind. I looked at a prototype when I was in Europe a couple months ago, so maybe that'll be on the market late this year or next year. But I was hoping we would do it in this country. Man. There's another implement that we got a lot of requests for, the crimper roller, to be able to manage cover crops, doing a roll and crimp down on cover crops. A lot of requests over the years saying, hey, wish we could get a crimper roller. So finally, after you hear the request like the 10th time, it's time to start building the implement. So we just built it. We worked a lot with the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania, who has been building these things for quite a while and doing a lot of research with them. So we worked with them to get the design right. Everybody familiar with a flail mower, what it is and what it does? Okay.
Thank you. So just from a production standpoint on our farm, I can just talk briefly about how we use ours. So like I said, we do have the subsoiler, which is just a shank like this, a big arm. It's not PTO driven, it just attaches on the back. And it is what we have replaced basically our broad fork with. So to just kind of break up that bed pan, aerate down there. We do have we're 30 minutes away, so we have clay soils. But I kind of don't even use it anymore because just our soil is nice enough and got enough tilth and organic matter. But I will even say, when we were putting up a new high tunnel, we might put down a tarp to kill, the grass or sod, pull back that tarp, and then run that subsoiler through, and it goes through. We have a 16 horsepower Grillo, 14. And if you put wheel weights on the wheels, it goes through. So they are very powerful. And then, so we might do that. And then we just, I don't even own a tiller. people, they're like, oh, what? But we have the power harrow, which has the tines that work like this. And then there's like the roller on the back, which is kind of like the crimper roller. It's just a cage that smooths out the seed bed. So thank you. Even if there is crop debris or weeds or something, we will run that harrow through, and it will break up and kill everything. And then if it's a clean enough bed, leave it for direct seeding, like we use a Jang, or we also use the paper pot transplanter through it. And so we use the power harrow basically for any kind of bed prep, and it's fantastic. So yeah, we don't use any kind of tillage, and we also use it if we are going to spread cover crop seed. We'll spread the cover crop seed and then do a very shallow pass with the power harrow to just kind of work that seed in there, and then also use the roller in the back to have that seed to soil contact. And then, and the other thing is the flail mower, and we use that on our cover crops. I grow a lot of sorghum Sudan grass, and it will literally be this tall and this thick and have ring grown and it's like a forest, and it just chops right through it. It's very satisfying, really, like just to go through that and mow it all down.
The flail mower, the mower type, the way it's designed, it masticates the material completely, which is not something you get from a brush mower or a sickle bar. It just, everything that goes through it, if you mow that sorghum Sudan, you're probably not getting any pieces longer than 3 inches out of it. So it breaks down quickly into the soil, and it's not going to wrap up in tillage implements.
Yeah, so it basically chops it up. It doesn't like spray it anywhere. It drops it right where you mow it. Again, has never failed us until you like mow over some landscape fabric and then it get caught on there. But yeah, don't do that. But I will also add with the maneuverability, like that is such key. Like, for example, when I do a farm tour at my farm with people that are not farmers, and I, show off the equipment and whatever, when I explain, I do this because I don't need this much space to turn around, I can see like when that light bulb goes off in their heads, that like, oh yeah, you can grow a lot of food in a small space because you don't need to like turn your tractor around. In the same way that, if you were growing a lot of rows of carrots in a 30-inch top bed, you don't need a big tractor to come through and cultivate in between each one. With a large tractor and cultivating, you'd have kind of like a single row of carrots that you work along. So it's using examples like that to get the message across to people that are not like us, that understand that you can grow a lot of food in a small space and have a business and have a career and a positive lifestyle to feed your community. There's some of these implements I wish I had, but I've gone 10 years with these things, just these few implements for our farm, in our conditions.
You're flow mowing down your cover crop, and then you're running your power harrow over top of that, and that's all the bed prep you need to transplant?
Yeah, so the question is, once there's a cover crop, flail mowing it, running the power harrow, and then seeding into it. Not quite, I wish. Perhaps if you had a tiller, you could get that matter under where it'd be clean enough.
One of the things a power harrow does is it mixes the soil horizontally.
Yeah.
So it's not going to mix the soil layers. And that's good if we're talking about keeping the bio-life in the soil at the level it's at. But it's not good if we're talking about needing to incorporate what's on top of the ground, because it can't incorporate and then not incorporate. It's one or the other. You've either got horizontal axis tilling, which is like this, like a tiller, or you've got vertical axis tilling going like this, and that's what the power harrow does. So if there's residue on top of the ground, it's going to push it around a little bit. It might mix a little soil up with it, but it doesn't bury it. Most of it is going to be on the top.
So our ideal situation is we would mow it down, we would run the power harrow through just to like mix it up a little bit, and then tarp it per se. honestly, half the time I don't run the power harrow through. We just mow it and tarp it. It seems to do well enough. And then, of course, depending on time of the season, it might take a few weeks, might take a few months. But then we pull it back and then run the harrow. Ideally, I like to run the harrow like right before we seed or paper pot, just to like have that nice seed bed, make it easy for those, the seeder and the transplanter to go through.
Yeah, but the tarp is basically doing what nature would do anyway. It's just doing it a lot faster by capturing the heat, moisture, and microbial action under there.
So the matter is breaking down, yes.
Okay, you're saying like when you plant your cover crop seed, it works better to use the harrow than a tiller?
Yes, because, in planting a seed, you probably just want to go as deep as the seed diameter. So you don't want to bury that seed, as it won't come up. So we have found that, instead of just throwing the seed out and hoping it grows, mixing it in a little bit with that soil, compressing it just slightly with the roller on the back gives the seed a better chance for germination and not getting eaten by birds. And yeah.
Because what's dictating the depth of the power harrow is the mesh roller on the back, and that's attached. It's braced against the top of the frame by a screw crank. You can see the screw crank right there, and you can crank that screw crank up or down. It locks in position every half revolution. So what that gives you is 1/8 inch increments that you can adjust the depth of this, so you can get it perfect.
And the deepest it goes is about 3 inches.
Actually, it'll go 5.5. So if it's only going 3, your tines are worn out.
Well, I just 3 sounds better, Joel.
Well, but most people run it 2 to 3 inches. You don't
Yeah.
need to go deeper, but it will go 5.5 inches deep at full depth.
Yeah, so I don't call myself no-till because that's just a can of worms, but, we have never tilled on our farm.
Minimum tillage.
Minimum tillage, yes. And so, we're not bringing up the weed seeds. We're having healthy root systems. We grow carrots that are 12 inches long. So, did I answer your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, because I've used the tiller for cover crop seeds, but I never used the power harrow.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know if it would actually get it into the ground, just like you're saying, just mix it up.
Yeah, it mixes the soil around enough that it's going to cover those seeds well enough. And for example, if you were applying a compost to the top of a bed and you wanted to mix that into the top 3 inches, the power harrow would be an effective tool for doing that because it's not fibrous. The big problem with the cover crop residue, especially fresh cover crop residue that's still all got that stringiness to it, is the tines are just going to hook onto that and push it around in circles. It can't, if it can slice through the material, if it's just fully composted compost, granulated material, or cover crop seed or anything like that, any granulated amendment, the tine, as it makes this curve, it's slicing through that and opening up a furrow, and the stuff falls into the furrow behind it, right? So it'll effectively mix granulated or, more granulated stuff into that top layer of, 1-2 inches, no problem. It's the fibrous material that presents the real challenge because it just bunches up on top of the tines and just shoves it around in a circle. Once that fibrous material is broken down by a silage tarp, it can actually slice through it and incorporate it a lot better.
Sarah, did you have a question?
Can you talk about how you use weights, wheels or the front of the machine for different implements to make it more manageable for like smaller farm workers or just general like body preservation?
Yeah. So our wheel weights that go.
We want to repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. She's asking about the wheel weights and different weights that we put maybe on the front of the tractor. It mainly helps with traction, but how that relates to people being able to use it and maneuver, just ease, I guess is your question. So the wheel weights, you get these posts. You buy these extra posts that come out here, and you put the wheel weights on there. Those are just weights I bought off Facebook Marketplace to pump iron.
There they are right there.
Yeah, there they are right there.
Barbell weight plate.
Yeah. I never take those off my tractor because I'm lazy and they just, you can't, to me, I can't tell that they are there. I will say with the Power Harrow, I don't think you have a picture of it, there's like a suitcase weight that will hang off the front bar, like on that top right picture. It would hang off the front bar.
Hang off the engine bumper.
Yes. I use that every time with the Power Harrow just because it like evens, the Power Harrow is pretty heavy, so it evens it out and it's just, it makes it even easier to maneuver.
The point is that a walk-behind tractor is a seesaw. Okay, it's a single axle machine, which means all the fulcrum is the axle, and you've got weight on one side, which is the engine. You've got weight on the other side, which is the handlebars, and then the implement. You got the engine on one side, the implement on the other. The handlebar weight is sort of variable because it turns around from one side to the other depending on what implement you've got. But if your Power Harrow or other soil working implement is overly heavy, and you want to make the machine easier to handle because you're having a hard time lifting that Power Harrow up out of the ground, that's where the suitcase weights come in. You weight the front end of the machine. We even have weights for some of the mowers, like the sickle bar mowers are lighter weight. Well, when you turn the handlebars around and you've now added the weight of the handlebars to the engine, now your mower may be too light, so you may have to weight the mower to keep it on the ground. So, the factory produces some weights. We produce a lot of the weights ourselves because we can do a lot cheaper than buying Italian cast iron. But the point is that to make the tractors easy to use for anybody, you have to counterweight it properly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm no beefcake, but yeah, when you are power harrying, you do have to like lift it up because you don't want to be harrying your headways or maybe there's some landscape fabric, and you're turning it around and I can do it. Everybody I know can do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've sold these machines to a lot of 100-pound women farmers, and they can do it when it's properly counterbalanced. It's all about that proper counterbalance, and a lot of dealers don't seem to understand that. We've corrected a lot of issues with people buying equipment from other dealers who didn't quite know what they were doing, and they sell them a very heavy implement without appropriate counterbalancing. And the end result of that is the customer hates the product. They're like, I hate using this thing. It just wears me out. I'm like, but it's just simple physics. You need 50 pounds of weight on the front, and you'll love this thing. So, yeah, it's and something that a lot of people don't think about in terms of that balance equation is the axle torque. So if you ever driven a four-wheel farm tractor up a hill with a heavy implement on the back and had the front wheels come up off the ground, it's kind of scary, right? Well, that's axle torque. That means as that axle turns forward and it encounters resistance because you're going up this hill, the reverse torque is going to try to lift the front end of the tractor. It's exactly the same thing that happens with a cordless drill if you were to, zip it up and then grab the chuck with your other hand. What happens? Equal and opposite reaction. The drill is going to try to twist the other direction. So whichever direction the axle is going and your load is, the tractor body itself is going to have the opposite reaction. So if you're going forward with a soil working implement on it and you're lifting it out of the ground while moving forward, the axle torque is actually working against you at that point. It's pushing the implement into the ground. Okay, so you have to put extra counterbalance weight on the front to counter that. So just doing a static check of how does this thing feel when it's stationary might not be enough because sometimes you'll be making that turn while you're in motion and that actually increases the downward pressure on the implement. It's all physics. It's just physics they come into play a lot more with a walk-behind tractor because it's a single axle machine. We don't have to think about it as much on four-wheel tractors because you got four wheels on the ground. Physics kind of take care of themselves. So anywho.
One last thing I did want to say, and this is just my experience at, farm your own farm, but I did purchase the wheel extensions because we grow the kind of standard 30-inch top with 18-inch paths. And I was like, oh yeah, this would be great because the wheels won't be on the bed at all. I hate them. I took them off and they're sitting in my barn. I'll happily sell them to you. Because it made it hard to turn and kind of maneuver and the balance and the weight got off for sure. And so it just wasn't worth it. And these things are light enough, you know, that, and especially, you know, you're using your soil implement on the back, it's not driving over what you've just done. But buy them if you want.
Right, and you wouldn't believe how many people I talk out of those things. A lot of people say, oh, I want the axle extensions to straddle my 30-inch bed. And then I say, well, what implements are you going to use on the tractor? And they tell me, like, the power harrow, the rotary plow, the flail mower. And I'm like, you don't need the axle extensions. The only reason you need axle extensions to straddle the bed is if you're doing something like what we're doing in this picture. That is, if you're laying down black plastic mulch, you don't want two tire tracks across the top of the bed under that mulch, because you might be planting a vegetable start right into a tire track. Same thing with the bed shaper. You know, the bed shaper is pulling soil in from each side to make this raised bed. Well, you know, yes, the bed shaper is going to cover the wheel tracks if the wheels were adjusted, you know, into their normal position. But still, we have compressed soil partway down in that raised bed. And if we have to make two passes, because the soil was heavy and I had to make two passes with the bed shaper to get it up to the height I wanted, then again, I've got another layer of compressed soil that I'm simply covering with loose soil. So if you don't want any compressed soil in the bed at all, you've got to straddle. But basically, there's three implements that require the long axle extensions. It's the bed shaper, the plastic mulch layer, and the multi-row vegetable seeders that you can put behind a walk-behind tractor. Again, you don't want to plant into a tire track with a seeder. But for anything else, you basically don't need it. It's like the machine weighs, as Maggie says, 300 pounds. The compaction you get driving this across the top of the bed is so negligible compared to four-wheel tractor equipment. It's less than a person walking across the bed. So you just don't need them in many cases. Although I have run into a couple cases in certain soil types that required the axle extensions, even for using things like the power harrow. And it was because their soil was so soft, and we never deal with this here in Kentucky. I was dealing with this out on the West Coast and in parts of like Wisconsin or northern Illinois. But their soil was so soft that just driving the tractor wheel near the edge of a raised bed, the soil would just squirt out from under the wheel because it had no body to it at all. Clay is a great building material. It stacks very well. So I can run my wheels right at the edge of my raised beds, and the raised beds they're just fine. But in some soils, they can't do it. But we're not in that bioregion here. So yes. Yeah, but anyway, if you need to sell those axle extensions, just bring them back. You can trade on them.
I've thought about it, but
Yeah, they're not for everybody. And they do make the thing very wide. And that's what I tell people on the phone. I'm like, look, if you don't need to run these, don't run them, because you won't like the tractor. It's 42 inches wide with these things on there.
and if you think I'll just use it when I use the harrow, well, they're not that easy to put on and off. So
We do have we did design an actual adjustable extension now to where the wheels will slide in and out. And if you're doing, work that requires narrow track for one thing and wide track for another, the adjustables are nice.
Well,
a little
you
more
thought of
expensive.
everything.
Pardon?
You thought of everything.
Well, we tried. The problem with the adjustables is even when their wheels are slid in, you still have the post that they slide in and out on sticking out. So the machine is actually still 42 inches wide, just the wheels are not 42 inches wide. So if you need to get through a 33-inch or 36-inch door going into your high tunnel, you're screwed. So they're not for everybody.
Yeah, they're great to use in a high tunnel. We have 4.5 high tunnels, and I can't imagine trying to work the soil without something like that in there. I know there are people that build their tunnels that a four-wheel tractor can drive through, but then I'm like, how do you get to the sides? I don't know. But
I want to know how you have a half a high tunnel.
because I'm lazy and haven't finished it.
Okay.
If anybody wants to come and see how to build a high tunnel, we'll have a good field day.
Workshop, there you
Yes.
go. This little implement here is something relatively new for us. It started out as a mini trencher, which was an implement with a big wheel with tines on it that just dug a 6-inch wide, 2-inch wide, 6-inch deep trench in the ground and laid the dirt very prettily to one side. And it was used for things like, installing sprinkler systems or putting in a propane line or running your phone line out to your shed or whatever. And I looked at it one day and I thought, why couldn't we just make a strip tiller out of that? So we blocked off the where the soil normally would come out and pile up nicely on the ground. And we put a flap in the back to let the soil out the back end instead. So now we've got a 2-inch wide strip tiller. So for folks who are wanting to do minimum tillage, and if you say you are growing a cover crop and then mow off the cover crop with a flail mower, and now you want to do absolutely the minimum amount of tillage to get stuff in the ground, you can do a 2-inch wide strip. Run your seeder right down that strip, plant your transplants right into it. We've made the depth adjustable to as little as 3 inches deep, depending on what you want to do. But it disturbs the absolute minimum amount of soil to, get a crop into the ground. At least, that we can do mechanically. Obviously, you could dig holes every, 2 feet and plant a start that way, but, this is a lot faster. So it's another tool in the toolbox, and, it's been a pretty good success. So there's all that stuff again. The rotary plow is actually something that was pioneered by the Gravely Company of West Virginia. They pioneered that design on a walk-behind tractor back in the 30s, and now they're built by a company called Berta in Italy. And the first thing they did, of course, they looked at it and they're like, well, this makes no sense on the front of a tractor because everything in a Gravely was on the front. They put it on the back, which made it a lot easier to handle. And it'll build raised beds because it discharges soil to the side, as you can see in the one picture there. So you kind of exploit the fact that it throws soil to the side, and you can build some pretty awesome raised beds. In fact, by the end of that there's a whole series of photos I have with that same process, I produced a bed that was 20 inches tall, which is stupid tall. But I had a guy in Hawaii who wanted to know if it would do a 20-inch tall bed, because for ginger, that's what they do. They start out planting it in a trench, and by the end of a 9-month growing season, they filled the trench and built a 20-inch tall raised bed because it continues growing within that over a 9-month season. So based on those photos, he bought 2. He still uses them. So but the rotary plow is actually not designed as a bed building tool. That was kind of an after effect. I mean, what it does is it breaks sod. It's the most effective sod breaking tool for a walk-behind piece of equipment. You can run it through straight sod. It'll go 10 to 12 inches deep in one pass and give you worked soil. And it doesn't break it up super fine. It doesn't really over pulverize the soil. It's like kind of plowing and disking. You're going to get some large chunks in there, so you need to do some secondary tillage afterward. But since it's a vertical axis device and you don't have the tines descending through the ground and smearing the soil along the bottom of the tilth, those plowshares are operating on a constant depth. You get no appreciable hard pan. There's no compression of that soil.
And yeah, we used it to make a lot of our initial plots. It is kind of a workout, but
it is.
It makes you feel really good at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, and a lot of farms are kind of where you are. Once you're established and you've got all your beds established and you're not going to be breaking any more sod, you really kind of don't need the thing.
And we don't do raised beds, so we don't use it.
Not everybody does. Yep. Right. Yeah, you're not. You can get by with a lot less fuel when you're not moving a bunch of steel around the field. That's just extra weight. So it's just a 1-cylinder implement. Maggie kind of covered this. Repair costs on walk-behind tractors a lot less. Simple machines. You can do a lot of the work yourself, which is very nice. We like empowering our customers to do their own service. BCS has kind of complicated their machines more in the last 10 years. They've got hydromechanical clutches on some of their machines, and now they've introduced a hydrostatic drive on a couple of their machines. Those are not so service friendly. So, when we talk to a customer and they're asking what we recommend, we just investigate sort of their mechanical aptitude and how close are they to a dealer. And if you want one of these more complex 2-wheel tractors like a BCS with a hydro clutch, you probably should be closer to a dealer because you're probably not going to work on that thing yourself. So you have to just figure it out. I really have always enjoyed this relative simplicity of a walk-behind tractor. I mean, you could pull an engine off one of these things and put a clutch in 15 minutes. It's just with the dry clutch. It's, it doesn't take an engine hoist or anything special. The engine's 80 pounds. You can slide it off onto a milk crate or something like that.
And if you just need to take it to your friend's farm, I mean, it just throw it in the back of a pickup truck. Well, don't throw it, but
If you lift it, you can throw it.
Yeah, and if you just have ramps or like we just kind of back up to a half wall we have on our property and just drive it right on. So share it, take it to get fixed.
With the handlebars rotated around to the engine side of the machine and then lowered down, which takes a few seconds, I have fit a 12 horsepower walking tractor, a 26-inch tiller, and a 26-inch bush hog in the back of a Honda Civic wagon and gone to a trade show. You can really pack them into a small space. So if you got a minivan or an SUV, you can haul these things around. Okay, virtually no soil compaction, right? We've covered a lot of this stuff. Yes, great exercise. Look, I put it in the damn slideshow. I didn't have to say it. Yep, no front loader. Working on the post hole digger. Limited tractive power. This is something we run into a lot. People say, I want to pull logs out of the woods. I'm like, don't get one of these. If what you're trying to pull weighs more than the tractor, you're not going to move it. I don't care. This is just physics. So, some people are frustrated thinking, I've got all this horsepower, and how can I utilize that for tractive purposes? And the point is, it doesn't weigh much. I mean, traction is a direct result of how much something weighs, how much those tires are pressing down on the ground. And we just don't have much. I mean, the advantage of the walk-behind tractor is being small and light and maneuverable. You can't have a lot of traction at the same time. You can do trackman augmentation, like Maggie says, you put wheel weights on it, which increase your pulling power. You can put dual wheels on it. You can put steel cleated wheels on it. You can put the bulldozer tracks on it. All these things are traction augmentation accessories. But still, you're going to hit a wall at some point where it's not going to move this tree you're trying to pull out of the woods or whatever it is. So, yes. And, we try to, we get customers sometimes, they're like, I got 50 acres of hay. These things look great. I'm like, no. You probably have a life other than making hay, so you don't want this. Because, they have to be scale appropriate. Yes, the equipment is very cool and they'll do a lot of things, but you don't want to, try to do, you're not going to till 10 acres with one of these things. But we do have lots of farms we deal with that are hybrid farms. They've got a four-wheel tractor, maybe 40, 50 horse, and they've got a walk-behind tractor. They'll use their four-wheel tractor for the kind of the big prep, the beginning of the season, the big mowing, the big tilling of the beds or whatever, and then mid-season, and then for the rest of the year, it's all walk-behind tractors. They can get into the established beds. They don't have to take trellises apart. They can get into a half a bed and rework the top of it to put in a different crop. Very little compaction, not messing things up. So, trimming around the edges and, doing all the little work that needs to be done. So there's plenty of places for them, even on big farms. There's the baler. This is a PTO-driven trailer. So once you plug that baby in, you've got a four-wheel drive truck. There's only 2 models of walk-behind tractor that will accept that implement. None of the BCSs will actually, but one Grillo and the Barberi tractor have the PTO option because you need a synchronized PTO. The type of PTO to run this trailer is not the same PTO you run the implement with, because that's independent of your wheel speeds. You need a PTO that's synchronized with the wheel speeds. So when you put it in reverse, the PTO turns backwards and the wheels of the trailer back up. So, the Synchro PTO is something that's only available on a few tractors, but I've got one of these on my farm and it is awesome. I mean, it's our truck, it's our farm truck. Got a dump bed on it, just a manual dump, but it works fine. Yeah, well, I've done that plenty, so. Where are we at? All right, well, I can blah, blah, blah then.
Are there any other questions? Yeah. We could talk about something else if you want to, politics. Yeah.
We're too depressed. I mean, one thing that's always kind of struck me about, and one of the reasons I really like the walk-behind tractor concept is, and that whole farming with your feet on the earth concept is, I think that, and I'm again preaching to the choir here because I'm talking to a bunch of organic farmers, but just literally physically being in touch with your soil and noticing what's going on with your soil. And when you're up in an air-conditioned cab getting your tractor steered by GPS, you don't know what the hell's going on down there. You can't see what the earthworms are doing. You can't see anything about your soil. You literally can't see it. You can't feel it. You're not in touch with it. And the movement towards smaller scale farming, where we are actually on the ground and dealing with our soil on a day-to-day basis, I just think that energy connection and that whole connection on many different levels is, part of what, I don't know, gives me hope. It's
Like the first thing I say when somebody's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a farmer and not the kind that sits on a tractor." Like, I don't want to be labeled the wrong thing. So.
Yeah. We're gonna have to come up with a different term. Like I'm a food production. Yeah, but specialist gets overused.
I also say I'm a vegetable
Artiste.
professional.
Vegetable professional. See, that's
Vegetable
good.
professional.
I like that. Yep.
So my whole farm is 30 acres, the property, hence kind of needing the four-wheel tractor, or really my husband thinks we need it, but the production area is like less than 3. That's including the high tunnels. So it, sometimes I'll have a whole like 100 by 100 foot plot of cover crop that I need to mow. I mean, it's maybe an hour to do that. So most tasks, all tasks can be done.
Yeah, typically we find that the 1 to 3 acre range is kind of where the walk-behind tractors fit.
And if you have more acres, just buy 2 tractors.
Right, you just need somebody else to run it. But yeah, we have several farms we deal with that are up to 10 acres and they just have multiple walk-behind tractors, or they're hybrid farms where they're using a small 4-wheel as well. And several smaller. We're doing there's a lot of little urban farms going in where they're reclaiming urban lots and turning them into agricultural production. And some of those are tiny, a quarter acre, but they might have more than one of them. They can move the tractor around because they are easy to haul in just about anything that rolls. Yeah. Actually, the electrical generator here in the center, that's one of the implements that we had interest to ship to Italy because they didn't make one over there. But we produced that at our place. The snowblower, we just hardly ever get any chance to use that.
You didn't use it this year?
Until this last week. Finally, for the first time in 15 years, I got to use a snowblower, and I was very glad to have it. And it made short work of that 1.5 inches of ice that was in the center of our 10 inches of snow. It just crushed it up and blew it out. Yep. We don't have the compost spreader up there. I needed to add that to the slides. Yeah, I don't think I have all the implement types represented in the slideshow, but yeah, I should probably do that. Yeah, the compost spreader is pretty cool. And they're built in America too, over in Pennsylvania. Yep. Yeah. You had mentioned about planting cover crops using the tiller, which I do. I don't own the power harrow myself, and I just use the tiller to kind of get the cover crops in the ground. It's not quite as effective as the power harrow because it doesn't have that mesh roller on the back kind of pressing it down, but I do the same thing with my tiller. And what I typically do with mine, I'll just distribute the cover crop seed on the bed, manually, and then actually just roll the tiller over the top of the bed. That is, I drive it over, but I don't even engage the PTO. I just let the tines roll on top of the ground. It kind of rolls it around a little bit. The problem is the middle buster in the center will sort of make a little bit of a furrow. Yeah, but it works well enough. I get pretty good germination like that. But I don't want to beat the soil up any more than necessary. But the power harrow is great because you can really idle it down if you don't, you can idle the tractor down, put the tractor in a higher gear if you want, which reduces the PTO speed relative to your wheel speed. And then you just do a light stir going down there, and then that mesh roller packs it all in. So.
Do you have any recommendations for using some kind of PCS implement to spread lime?
The question is recommendations for spreading lime with a walk-behind tractor.
I will say that is one of my just personal downfalls is like if we do need to spread lime, incorporating it, a tiller would be better to just get it deeper there in the soil. So.
Right, right. Yeah, if you need vertical axis, or I'm sorry, if you need vertical tillage that brings your crop or whatever you're putting on top down into your soil, the tiller is the best for doing that. Actually, the drop seeder,
Yeah, that's what I was
right in the corner there, will do lime. It doesn't have a huge capacity. You know, you'd have to be refilling it pretty often, but it does give you a nice even distribution. There's also a rotary spreader that just kind of throws it out centrifugally like a salt spreader. But it's, you know, it's going to put it everywhere, right? It's not going to drop it right on your bed. And the dust those things create is pretty amazing. Kind of dust cloud the neighbors. So I think the drop spreader probably would be the best thing. I mean, but maybe the manure spreader even. I mean, it would put it on pretty thick though. I mean, you can open the gate on the front various amounts, but if you had it on the very lowest setting, just for putting out like a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch.
Or yeah, you could just mix it with compost. The lime.
Yeah, that would probably actually work better if you mixed it with compost in an application like that, because I think the straight lime would eventually start to screw up things in the compost spreader in terms of just the abrasive. You know, if you once that got into the working parts, I'm afraid it would just start wearing things out. I'll need to do some more asking around because I think some of my customers have been experimenting with that, and I need to ask them about that. The compost spreader is a relatively new product. It's been sold for about 3 years, so you know we're still getting feedback on that. But that and the drop spreader, I think would be, the drop spreader has fewer moving parts in it, so I think it would hold up a little better. So, yes? Okay, we'll take a break, and then we'll have our servicing session afterward. Do you know if the tractor's gonna come in here, or? Okay, okay, cool.
I forgot to introduce myself earlier. I'm Linnell Rivera Rodriguez. I'm a Research and Extension Associate here at Kentucky State in the Organic Program. I give you all a little pre-conference workshop feedback. Please make sure before we end the session, which is 12:30, just fill it out and leave it on the table, and I'll pick it up in the end. Thank you. If you want to hold it, you can.
Yeah, I'll do my best. You don't have a headset, do you?
Well, I was saying, you put it on the table here, you can
Take it off the top. Right. And I should have brought All right. So, is this on? No. Yes? Okay. All right, second half. So service and maintenance. So this is one of the machines we've sold to KSU Farm here. By complete ironic circumstance, this machine is one of the wet clutch machines with a hydrostatic drive, so it's the hardest to service. They have older machines here that I would have preferred doing the service on, but this is what they brought. So probably because it was the newest and it started easily in the sub-zero weather, but anyway, whatever. So it's not ideal because some of the things I wanted to show you do have to do more with the other styles of machines, but I'll improvise. So first thing I'm going to do is a little demonstration of just one of the things you're going to do often on a walk-behind tractor, which is change the implement, right? And this is something that I've spent countless hours talking to people about over the phone when they get their new equipment. They're like, I can't get this implement off or on or whatever. And I'm like, watch my videos. And they're like, whatever. Anyway, I've got 6 videos on the quick coupling system. So the quick coupling is the most common method of attaching implements on the walk-behind tractors that we offer. There's a couple walk-behind tractor models that don't have a quick coupling system, but virtually all of the tractors we sell, probably 99% of them, have the quick coupling system. Because if you're changing implements often, you just don't want to have to be fooling with a wrench every time you need to change implements. And understanding how to use the quick couplings correctly is all a matter of physics. I'll say it again. I like that word. I've always liked physics. And it is understanding the physics of how the implement is attached and the weight and balance of the machine and where the pressures are on the quick hitch is key. So it's back to high school physics here. We'll see if I can set this down and it still pick up halfway decent. Okay? Okay. All right, so the quick coupling system is a male-female coupling system. So you've got the female is typically mounted to the tractor, the male is mounted to the implement. The two have to slide together, and then there's a locking pin on top that locks the two in place.
But they love each other.
And they love each other. Right. So your locking pin, you've got a lever of some kind that raises the locking pin up. The lever styles differ a little bit from BCS to Grillo and various models and year types and things like that, but essentially the concept is the same. Now, if first off, if you're having difficulty raising the locking pin, if you go to raise this lever and it just doesn't want to come up, you go and you get a bigger hammer, right? No. The reason it doesn't want to come up is because the pin is in a bind, right? The pin is dropped through a hole. And if there's a side load on the pin, like the thing is twisted against it, it's just not going to want to slide up. So what you do is just grab hold of your handlebars. This is a very long lever we have to control the machine with. So you just wiggle it around a little bit and keep a little pressure up on the lever until it comes up. And when you relieve the pressure on the pin, it's going to come up, unless it's just been sitting there for 5 years and it's like frozen in place with rust. That's a different story. But if you can use the lever to kind of rotate the pin a little bit, then you know it's not frozen. It's going to come up. Once the pin is up, then it's a matter of getting the couplings to slide apart. So now this is a great implement to demonstrate this with. This is the Power Harrow. And it's got the mesh roller in the back, like we talked about in the presentation. And so what they've got right now is they've got the Power Harrow, they've got the mesh roller cranked all the way down to hold the tines up out of the ground for transport, which is a great feature of this thing, so you can drive it around and not make a bunch of grooves in the soil or in your carpet if you happen to be inside. So I want to roll this tractor away from this implement. Well, right now, this 168-pound implement is essentially hanging on the quick coupling. Why? Because the weight of the Power Harrow is being supported by this mesh roller in the back and the quick coupling at the front, okay? So half of the weight of this thing is hanging on that quick coupling, and I guarantee you, if I try to push this off, no amount of wiggling is going to make that thing come off because it's sitting on it. I've got to relieve the pressure on that quick coupling. I've got to take the load off of it. That's going to be very easy because I'm just going to crank this mesh roller up until the tines come down on the ground. I know when that happens because the mesh roller starts to roll, okay? Now the weight of this is the gearbox, this is the center, this is where all the weight is. Now those tines are sitting directly on the ground. And I can do this little deal. See that a bit of play right there? That is that little bit of up and down handlebar wiggle you can see happening. No. Right. Sorry. Should turn that thing off. Nobody has my cell phone number, except my wife. Anyway, that little bit of play in the quick coupling is extremely important because that represents the
the place where the quick coupling is not bearing weight. When I'm pushing down, the quick coupling is bearing my weight right now. When I let go, the quick coupling is actually supporting the weight of the engine, which is trying to pull the front of this machine down. If we took this implement off, the whole machine is going to fall forward because the engine is heavier than the handlebars. So right now, the weight of the engine over the fulcrum of the wheels is being supported by that quick coupling. So to find where that, right in the middle of that, is where it's not bearing weight and will slide. It's a very gentle type of, finding that sweet spot in the quick coupling. And, I have a video that's like 10 years old and has 1 million views, and I talk about using the patented quick hitch jiggle, I call it, to find that sweet spot. And people watch that, and every time, even my own employees, they will just be too violent with it. They'll grab it and just like jerk it up and down like this. And I'm like, no, it's a very gentle thing. Because what you don't see, it's hard to see, what somebody's doing, in the fine motor skills, right, in a video. But what I'm doing is I'm pushing down and letting up, pushing down and letting up. I'm not actually wiggling it up and down. I'm pushing down and letting up. Because you just have to let the gravity take the front end down, which will bring the handlebars back up. So it's just a very gentle little wiggle. And as the quick couplings get a little more wear on them, they get a little easier, because when they're, the hardest part for us as dealers of these machines is dealing with people right off the bat who they've gotten their brand new machine, which means they have zero experience. They'll never have less experience than they have right then, and their quick couplings will never be tighter than they are right then. So the learning curve it's a huge steep curve, and then it gradually comes out like this as they get a little more experience, as the quick couplings loosen up. But gentle is the key word. Just now sometimes on the BCS machines, you'll have the quick couplings just failing to couple for that last 1/4 inch because the shaft isn't properly lined up. One difference between BCS and Grillo, for example, is that on the BCS machines, when the quick couplings slide together, the shafts, the teeth, there's like 3 teeth on each shaft, actually have to mate on the BCS machines. On the Grillo, they don't. The shaft doesn't engage until you actually physically engage the PTO lever. Then it jumps out from the tractor and engages onto the implement. So actually, coupling onto a Grillo is a little easier in the sense that you don't have to worry about the shafts aligning. On the BCS, the shaft teeth are sort of tapered a little bit to help with the alignment, but there's a little bit of a flat spot right on the end of the taper. Why they do that, I have no idea. It seems like you could just tape them all the way, but they thought we need to frustrate people somehow. So, because sometimes like 1 out of 10 positions will be flat against flat, with little tiny flat surfaces hit it bang. So if it hits a little bit on the angled surface, it will like push the one shaft around and it'll line up. But sometimes before I put an implement on, and I just, I change implements in my barn on a dirt floor. Everything's unlevel. It's a mess, but you can do it. You don't need a level surface like this. I just take a gander. I look inside the tractor up into the quick coupling, and I say, okay, I got a shaft tooth on the top. Okay, I should have an opening on the top over here, or at least close to it. And then I know it's okay. But if there's a shaft tooth at the top on this, and there's one right at the top here, I know that it'll hit right hand down. So I'll just reach into the tractor and push the shaft around. Yeah, you're gonna need some grease. You can use a piece of wood to do it if you want. But if you get halfway close to lining up, then it's gonna come on. Then once you
I was gonna say, like when you're putting it on specific power, remember there's that lever that will change the angle.
Yeah, right. That lever, you've got your power arrow. The mesh roller has to be up off the ground to allow that thing to couple at the right angle and the weight distribution correct. And this goes for a lot of implements. Like for example, the flail mower, when it's off the tractor, will typically tilt forward a little bit, so the PTO will be a little higher up. But you can use the tractor to sort of reach up and grab it. And I'll demonstrate that here in a minute. More. So if you have an implement like a tiller or a flail mower that sits at an angle when it's off the tractor that's sort of pointing up in the air like that, you can come up to it with the tractor and sort of grab it from the top and then use the tractor to leverage it down. So you get it to where it lines up and then just start doing your wiggle, wiggle, wiggle and bring it on. I've done the same thing with my lawnmower, which is an implement which has caster wheels in the front, so the front of the deck is sitting up, but the back end of the deck, once it's not on the tractor, just flops down on the ground, so it's 2 inches low on that end. So in that case, we've got a deal like this. Crank this back down the other way, sort of simulate it. So we've got an implement PTO that's too low, so obviously the angle isn't right here, so same thing, I'll come in like this and sort of scoop it up, and then use the 4-foot leverage I've got on these handlebars to pick up the implement and slide it in place. These are not steel-toed shoes, I shouldn't have done that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, but it's much easier to put an implement on the back, even if you
Exactly. We hadn't talked about that yet, but we're getting there.
If it's your mower, put it on the back.
That's right, that's right. Yep, in our quick coupling videos, and as Maggie just said, and I've said it a million times, change any implement you can with the handlebars in the position you see here, the rear PTO mode. There's so many advantages to doing it this way. Number one, you can see what you're doing. If you're on this side of the machine driving on, you're blind. You cannot see where the tractor PTO is, or the implement PTO. But you can also do the scoop thing. You can see what you're doing to do the upward push down or the lower scoop up, as I just demonstrated. You can see the shaft alignment if it's a BCS, and you're looking at how your teeth are lining up. And just the fact that handling this tractor without an implement on it, with the handlebars in this position, requires very little effort to keep the tractor level, right? Because the handlebars are basically counterbalancing the weight of the engine, right? If I have these handlebars turned around to the engine end, all the weight is on that side of the machine. It's an 80-pound deadlift to get this thing off the ground to get it onto the implement. So you're doing a lot more work. So anytime you can, back onto the implement. Pull off the implement going forward, back onto the new implement. So any implement that the handlebars will come over the top of, this is the way you want to hook it up. Now, exceptions to that are things like chipper shredders, snow blowers, a hay rake, a hay baler, implements that are too tall or massive for the handlebars to go over the top of, right? Those, you just have to have the handlebars turned around the other way. I have a video specific for that too. And it's a little more challenging, it just is, but it's just the reality of how these things are built. And there's still a way to do it. With chipper shredders, for example, I have a chipper shredder, and what I'll do is I run the chipper shredder into my barn. When I'm done with it, I'm done using it on the tractor, I drive it into the barn. I've got a post in the middle of the barn. I run it up to the post. I have an old strap, just one of these tie straps, like a motorcycle tie strap. I run it around the post and cinch it off, and there's the chipper shredder. It's part of that post now. Now I can just back off. I can flip my quick coupling hitch, wiggle the handlebars, get it back off. Now, when you've got the handlebars on the other end of the machine, I can't rely on that pushing down and letting up, because the letting up doesn't happen. All the weight's on this side of the machine, so I have to kind of wiggle it a little more. I have to do more picking up on the thing. The action is sort of reversed. It's picking up and letting down, and picking up and letting down, rather than the other. But you find that sweet spot, you back off the thing, and the implement can't follow the tractor because it's roped onto something. And when you come back onto that implement the next time you're going to hook it up, it can't run away from you because it's up against a post, or it's up against a wall, or whatever whatever you put it up against. So that's a nice little trick there. Some people say, oh, why don't you make like implement landing stands for these things, like little kickstands or platforms that the implement can fit perfectly in. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Or you can just use your head. Everybody's got a wall or a post or a barn or something. You don't need to buy a several $100 stand for the thing. Maintaining the quick coupling so that it actually works going forward, just keep a little bit of grease in the thing. Okay, if it gets totally dry and starts rusting, it's not a quick coupling at that point. It's simply a wrenchless connection, and it's something you will curse at because it doesn't slide very well, and the pin probably doesn't work very well anymore. So occasionally, just put a little grease. You can use like a spray grease. There are products out there that spray on and kind of congeal into a lightweight grease. Those are fine. I prefer a little heavier grease. I just use a regular, like, universal lithium grease, nothing special. And to apply it to the quick couplings, there is no grease fitting on the BCS quick couplings. Some of the Gorilla quick couplings have grease fittings on them. You know, if you don't want to get your hands all greasy, our favorite thing is we have 16-ounce Gatorade bottles. Cut the top off, you put some grease down in it, and you have an old paintbrush in it. And then you just take out the paintbrush and just paint up your quick couplings every time. Just a light coating. You can put too much grease on, believe me. I mean, this is a limited amount of space in that quick coupling. And I've had a case where a customer brought a machine back. She was a local customer, and she's like, I can't get this implement off. I've tried all the tricks. And I looked at it, and there was grease just like oozed out from this quick coupling. She apparently painted like a 1/4 inch thick on this thing and just jammed it together. I don't know how she got it on in the first place, but it would not come off. It was cold weather, and there was so much grease in it, it actually formed a hydraulic lock. It was a suction lock. I loosened up the nuts that hold the quick coupling onto the tractor, and then air was able to suck in back there. It went, and it came right off. I was like, you overgreased it. So there are limits. So yeah, a little grease occasionally, you know, put some, spray some penetrating oil on the quick coupling pin, you know, to kind of flush that out and keep that lubed a little bit. Eventually, enough crap can fall into the top of the quick coupling pin that it uses up the space necessary for the spring. That is, there's a spring that pulls this thing down, okay? That spring is up against a little snap ring in the housing and pushes down on the pin. Well, that spring has to compress into a well. There's a little bit of space there. And after 10 or 15 years, enough crap, just little pieces of dust and so forth, can fall down in the crack between this washer and the pin, that they fill up that void. And it becomes, you start noticing it when the quick coupling pin, like you get it almost to the apex of locking up, and there's a little resistance there. You kind of have to push it over that. And eventually it just won't go up at all, because there's too much dirt in there. We have a video on that, like how to take your quick coupling apart and clean out all the crap. So anyway, it's easy enough to do. You can just pop the locking pin off the top, or the locking lever rather, and the pin will drop out the bottom, and you can clean it all out. Getting this pin out of here, and you know, I'm spending a long time on quick couplings here, but believe me, it's one of the main phone calls we get. So let's get rid of this phone. On any of the BCS machines, the quick coupling locking lever is essentially just a piece of spring wire, okay? On the Grillo, it's different. It's actually better on the Grillo. They use a piece of formed steel locked in place with a roll pin. They never fall off. On the BCSs, they fall off a lot, especially on the older ones. But anyway, this red rubber grip falls off in about 20 minutes, or maybe a couple of years, but it falls off. So what you've got here is just a piece of spring steel wire that's been bent around in this shape. It meets in the middle. So you have two little tabs just point at the ends of the wire, point at each other, and those are the two tabs that go into those holes. You don't know how many times I've talked to people on the phone, well, I broke my quick coupling lever. I say, did it just fall off or did it break? And usually, 99% of the time, it's just come off. That is, they tried to force it because the pin was in a bind, and it simply opened up and popped off the top of the thing. All they have to do is spread it open and pop it back into the hole on the top of the quick coupling. There's nothing wrong with the thing. The problem with this design is that it's relying on typically just one thing to hold it together, keep it from opening up like that, and that's this stupid little piece of red rubber, which splits down the side and falls off usually after not too much time. This tractor is less than a year old, so it hasn't fallen off yet, but it will. So in our quick coupling videos, we tell people, don't rely on this. Duct tape is the way to go. Or reinforced packing tape or something like that. Just wrap the lever up, because that stuff is actually sticky. This is not sticky. These are $6 a piece. You can buy a whole roll of duct tape for $6 and do a lot of patching together on your truck with it. So just wrap a couple rounds of duct tape around this. It'll actually stay on here. It doesn't stretch like the rubber does. It won't split open. You need to reapply it in 5 years, put some more duct tape on it, but it'll actually hold it together on the BCS quick coupling. So but yeah. Now, this washer that sits right on top of the quick coupling, right under the lever, BCS changed this washer 2 years ago. It used to just be flat. If you've got an older BCS machine, this will be just a flat piece of a washer, just a round washer. This design here is great because it takes the place of the duct tape now. Once the thing is assembled, this is operating down in this well between the two arms of the washer. They simply took the washer and bent up the two sides of it. Now it can't expand and jump out of it. So even if the red rubber grip falls out on a new BCS machine, you don't need to worry about it. You don't even need to get the roll of duct tape. But if you've got an older BCS machine, you'll be employing the duct tape, or if you ever want to, you can just buy this new style washer. It'll retrofit the older ones just fine. But the thing is, if your quick hitch lever pops off, it's probably not the end of your quick hitch lever. As long as those two tabs are there facing inward still, you can put it back on. Just spread it open and put it back on. And as I said, once this is off, the pin just drops down on the inside. There's a little spring that pushes the thing down. This is clean, of course, because the machine is not very, very old. There's a little lubricant on it, which is good. There is also a snap ring going in the top of this thing. There's a snap ring, which is like a spring steel ring with two little holes in it. It's the snap ring pliers to get it out of there. So if you needed to service it from the top, you would have to take out the snap ring with the snap ring pliers. Then there's a little washer in there, then the thing can come out the top. But if you can get the implement off, it's just a lot easier to service it from the bottom. Just let the pin drop out. Back in. Hold my mouth just right. Okay. On the Grillo quick couplings, they have there's a grease fitting, but you'll notice the location of the grease fitting is right on the side of this housing where the pin drops up and down. So it lubricates the pin, but doesn't really, I don't rely on it getting grease all the way down around the male-female part of the quick coupling. So I still use a little, the Gatorade bottle paint trick on those, just because, you know, when you pump grease into that fitting on the Grillo, some of it's going to go down, but some of it just goes up. It just comes out all around the top of the quick coupling lever, and you know, it's not pushing it all the way down. I wish they would put their grease fitting a little lower, but I guess they were more concerned with lubricating the pin. Yes. That's where you use the paint. You know, just that's the main thing you're going to keep greased is the implement nail parts, because when they're off the tractor, they're just exposed, so it keeps them from rusting. You know, if you want to keep the grease or clean, you know, keep the dirt and crap from getting on there, from the wind blowing around or whatever, again, like a half a Gatorade bottle or half a Coke bottle type of thing, cut it in half and just slip it up over the quick coupling. BCS now sells little rubber sleeves for theirs. Fine, they're $6 a piece, or you can pick something up along the roadside that does just the job just fine. Just whatever. Great. That done. Questions?
So I wonder if you could talk, so this one is an electric start?
This one is.
They're not all electric starts?
No, they're not.
Is yours in?
So the electric start is a nice option for people who just want to, well, expend less effort, obviously. I mean, the battery's going to do the starting for you. I mean, it is an automotive style electric starter, which means it's a geared electric starter, just like you would have in a car or truck. The battery is recharged automatically by the engine when it runs, so you don't have to worry about charging the battery during the working season. And, you know, you can just turn a key and the thing starts up, so it's great. Obviously, they cost a little more. Buying it with the electric start option, you're going to spend $300 to $500 more depending on the model. And you now have a battery to maintain. So going forward, you'll have to spend a little time and energy and money on the battery. I mean, I don't run any of these machines with electric start at our place. You know, we've got one demo machine, or two demo machines that are tools, and I've got a couple at my house. They're all just manual start. I'm, you know, relatively dumb and fit, and I don't mind pulling the rope. So, but, you know, we sell, it's interesting, there was a time when we sold many more manual start machines than electric, but that has changed over the years. Now I think when we get into the bigger tractors, especially like the 13 horsepower class machines, which are the most popular machines for market farmer, we're selling more electric start than manual. And you know, part of it is just that a lot of the farmers we're dealing with are people with typically less upper body strength. That is, they're women. You know, and you know, men are just, you know, for that upward pull, the upper body strength and general height of a male is a little more advantageous. So, you know, women's strengths tend to be more in their lower body than their upper body. So it's just, from a physics perspective, when you get an engine, especially in the cold weather, when it's hard to pull that rope, it just becomes more challenging. Now there are engine adjustments that could be made to a manual start engine to keep it starting more easily. We have a video on our website talking about the valve adjustments on all modern engines, because any of these engines, anything for a 5 horsepower engine up, has an automatic decompression. That is, there's a compression release built into the engine. It's on the engine camshaft. It's a centrifugally operated compression release, because you don't want the compression release active all the time. If it was active all the time, the engine would run at partial power all the time, because part of your compression just being bled off. So the compression release is this, it's this RPM sensitive, that is speed sensitive, spring-loaded thing, and it basically releases part of the compression for easy starting when the engine is below like 200 RPMs. But once the engine starts, the compression release kicks off and the engine has full power. The problem is the compression release operates through the valve train. How the compression release works is it opens one of the engine valves, typically the exhaust valve, very slightly as the engine comes up to compression. What happens is the valve train wears. These are all overhead valve engines, meaning they have push rods and rocker arms between the camshaft and the valve. And as those components wear, because every time this engine, every minute this engine is going around 3,000 times or 3,600 times, so those components are getting used a lot and they compress and wear down a little. And after 3-4 years of use, there's more tolerance in those components. Well, since it's only opening the valve, say 10,000ths of an inch with the compression release, if your valve components, if your rocker arms and push rods wear 10,000ths and you get 10,000ths more gap, your compression release isn't working at all. So you'll pull the rope and the thing will just boom, it'll pop you back and you try to break your arm, and it really hurts. I mean, I've had it snap the rope out of my hands, I've had it snap the rope in half. And when somebody calls and orders a starter rope from us, this is always a sign. We say, when's the last time you set your valve? Never. If you don't want to break another rope, watch this video and reset your valves. It's literally a 15-minute job. I mean, you take this valve cover off right here. On Honda engines, it says OHV right there. That's overhead valve. Right under there are the 2 lifters and rocker arms, and it's a couple nuts on each one. You need a feeler gauge, and you need 3 wrenches. And you can do it in about 15 minutes. It's very easy to do, and it keeps a manual start engine starting at its, least effort. So, but if that's not enough, then you've got the electric start option. So, if you're investing in a machine like this, you have to put some thought into whether you want that electric start option or not, because it's not something that you can add later. Okay, these engines are not convertible from manual start to electric start. You have to change the whole engine. The engine is either one or the other. Now, you can you can replace the engine. That's no problem. We do it all the time, but it's obviously a bigger expense. So, you just have to put some thought into it. And I tell a lot of people, look, if there's going to be a lady running the machine who's not like into bodybuilding, and if you're a male and over 50 years old investing in the machine, you might just invest in the electric start, because the machine's going to last 20 or 30 years. The thing is, yeah, I'm 50 and I can start this thing fine today, but what are you going to feel like in 20 years? How are your shoulders and elbows going to be? Are you going to have rotator cuff issues or whatever it is? Anything that'll prevent you from doing that upward pull where you need to follow through at the end. That's the thing. If you give it a little pull and kind of phase out right about here, it's almost always going to kick back. Even if the compression release is working. have to follow through to get it over that second compression so the engine starts. So
But I can do it.
you can do it. You're tall, which helps. Yes. So
So
yeah.
the electric start engine doesn't have the pull?
It has the pull rope. All the electric start option engines have the pull starter on them as well. They're spec'd out that way. So you still have that backup if the battery's dead or whatever. Yeah. So.
I made that phone call. I've been directed to that video.
Yeah. Yeah, and the typical battery they run is just a lawn and garden battery. You know, that you can buy anywhere. It's not some weird battery that you have to go to Italy to find. Now we found an AGM battery. Anybody's familiar with what those are? AGM batteries are a little newer battery technology. I mean, they've been around for 20 years, but not in big numbers. But they're becoming a little more and more mass produced. You can buy AGM batteries for most vehicles these days. They're about twice the price, but the nice thing about them is they last a lot longer, and there's no acid spillage ever. It's a sealed battery, so you can turn them upside down. You don't have to worry about in the hot weather, boiling acid out and rusting your battery box away or anything like this. They're very nice. So we've switched to the AGM batteries as standard equipment on all the new equipment. And they can be retrofitted to the older machines too if you need one. So they just hook right up. I mean, the only thing is they're slightly smaller in terms of their dimensions, so you have to put something down in the battery box to sort of take up the extra room. 2x4 works really well. And speaking of 2x4s, we'll now talk about oil changes. So oil changes on any piece of equipment, and you'll wonder why I've talked about 2x4s and oil changes, but we're getting there. So engine oil change. This is the lifeblood of your engine. Don't not change the oil. If you can't remember when the last time you changed your oil, change your oil. I like to change oil in a small engine every 40 to 50 hours. The owner's manual usually says something like 75 hours, but who listens to owner's manuals when it comes to that? Because those people are selling engines, right? It's the same thing when you read your car owner's manual. It says change your oil every 7,500 miles. Never go that far. 5,000 at the most. I mean, the oil gets recirculated time and time again in this engine. So keeping it clean is just breathing more life into the engine. All the Honda, Subaru, Kohler, all the engines have oil drain plugs on the sides of the engine block down here at the bottom. There's usually going to be one on both sides. These are all universal engines, so they're going to put an oil fill and drain on both sides of the engine. You have no idea how many times people will call and say, which oil fill do I use, or which oil drain do I use? It's the same, it doesn't matter. The point is, whichever one you choose, you want to tilt it towards that one. What do I do if I do that? So here's where the 2x4 comes in. So I'm always going to roll this thing up onto a piece of 2x4 on one side of the machine. Actually, I don't want that side. I usually choose the side to do my filling and draining that's on the opposite side from the muffler and air cleaner, because they're just left in my way over here. Right in the puddle of water. It's really brilliant. Just a little tilt so that all the old oil gets out. If you leave the engine level, some of that oil is just going to lay on the bottom. It's not going to come out. So just a little bit of tilt, a couple inches is all it takes. Just roll it up on something like that. It's a good idea to run the engine a little bit before you drain the oil to kind of stir it up, get it loose a little bit, and warm it up so it runs out quicker. You don't have to run it long. A few minutes is fine. If you do it with the engine, if you just run in out of the field and you want to do an oil change, you're going to burn your fingers because the engine's really hot at that point, so that wouldn't be too smart. So warming it up a couple minutes is a good idea. Drain it into a pan, bring it to a recycling center, whatever. Depending on what implement is on the tractor, see how this tractor is kind of leaning backward just a little bit right now? It's sort of canted a little back. So a little bit of the oil is going to go into the plug, because this oil drain plug is right in the center of the engine front to back. So if it's leaning one way or the other, you're going to get a little oil sort of in a little pocket. It's not going to drain. So after it drains out to the point that it stops dripping like this, I'll lift it up like this tilt it the other way, that little pocket will then run forward to the drain plug and drain out. You don't have to hold it there long, maybe 30 seconds. Let it until it stops dripping and it comes down to just a couple drips. Make sure to level it out before you refill it. So there's a lot of people out there who are selling oil that will tell you that their oil is the best. And you know, I run a product called Schaefer's, which is a synthetic oil. But there's a ton of good oils out there. And if you, I mean, what any of these engines require in this bioregion is like a 10W40 motor oil for all season weather use. Now, if you were in the north and you were really running a lot in the cold weather, you might go down to like a 5W30. So you can actually start it with your snow blower on it in 15 minus, temperatures. But when you get back to warm season, I would go back up to a 10W40. And typically around here, the 10W40 works year round. We don't get that cold around here. 15W40 also works fine. 15W40 is typically considered a diesel oil. Anything that says 1540 says approved for diesel engines. Well, if it's approved for diesel engines, that means it's fine for gas engines too, because believe me, diesels have a lot more internal pressure and heat than a gas engine. So if you buy an engine that's or if you buy an oil that's diesel engine approved, you're paying a little more for it, but you're actually getting extra protection. So there's no problem at all with that. In fact, in my own tractor at home, I run 15W40. I have one machine that's a diesel, and I can run the same oil and everything that way. I don't have to worry about it. But if you want to save a few cents a quart, the 10W40 is fine because that's good for gas engines. If you have a diesel, definitely get the 1540. The engine owner's manuals from Honda usually recommend a 1030, but they're kind of making that recommendation based on all climate types. I'm talking about our bioregion here. We have more hot weather than we have cold weather. When the upper number, does anybody understand here how like 10W40, what those numbers mean? So basically, oil these days, multi-weight oil, like a 10W40 or 10W30 or 20W50, anything that has more than one number on it, the lower number, like the 10, is, well, let's back up a little more. A lower number on a motor oil means lighter oil, lighter weight, lower viscosity, it's thinner. Okay, so it flows easily. And that's important when the engine's cold. You've got to have oil that flows around in there so it can lubricate the thing while the engine's cold. Well, if you started at 10-weight oil, if you just had a straight 10-weight oil and you put it in this engine, it would be fine when you started up. But after you worked an hour with a flail mower on it, you'd probably ruin the engine because the oil is so thin by then, because oil gets thinner when it gets hotter. So by the time it heats up to full operating temperature of the engine, there's not enough thickness there to provide the lubrication that's needed at those high pressures and temperatures. So many, many years ago, they invented polymers. Polymers are things that they put in oil that thicken the oil as it warms up. They do the opposite of what oil wants to do on its own. So a 10W40 oil starts as a 10 weight when it's cold, and by the time it becomes full operating temperature, it's the same as a 40 weight oil. The polymers have thickened it up. Now what happens to a multi-weight oil is those polymers are, not only does the oil get dirty as you run the engine and carbon gets created in the engine and all this stuff and dirt, but the polymers start wearing out, because as those polymers have been used time and time again to thicken that oil up, they eventually just wear out. So by the time you're ready for an oil change, you've probably got a 10W20 oil. Okay? So this is why it's important to change oils. You just want to get that old out of there. So in our, as I mentioned earlier, in our bioregion, we typically deal with more hot weather than we do cold weather, especially with machines like this, which are used more in the warm season. So having a higher number on the top end gives you more high temperature protection. That oil, those polymers are going to last longer in terms of thickening that oil up. If you've got oil that only thickens up to a 30 weight, is the 10W30, well, by the time that's half worn out, it's a 10W15 oil, right? It's not a 10W20. So it's just giving yourself a little more high temperature protection. Synthetic oils tend to be more expensive. They also have synthetic polymers in them, which last longer. Everything about the synthetic oil will last longer. If you want to make the investment in synthetic oil, I say go for it. because it's fewer times you have to change the oil. The extra investment in the oil means you don't have to change it as often. So you can go 75 hours with synthetic oil on one of these machines, 80, I've even seen 100 hours. Diesels especially, you can go 100 hours on oil change with synthetic. So, there's a lot of synthetic oils out there, Castrol Syntec, Mobil 1, Amsoil, Schaefer's. They're all worth the investment. I run synthetic in mine. It's fewer oil changes I have to do. I'm spending about the same amount of money on oil changes because it's twice the money, but I'm doing it half as often. But it's that much less oil I'm bringing to the recycling center, right? So it's less time I have to spend changing oil, so it's a good thing.
Can you
So
talk
this-
about, sorry.
I was just gonna ask, there's an hour meter on it?
There is no hour meter standard equipment. We have an optional hour meter. And you can take any hour meter that you find on eBay and wire it right into these things. I mean, they're not hard to put on. Hour meters are a dime a dozen. Most of the induction hour meters, which is the most common type these days, for a gas engine, it's literally just finding some place to mount it, running the wire down, and wrapping the wire around the spark plug wire 3 or 4 times. The lead wire is a thin wire. You wrap it around the spark plug wire, put some zip ties or some electrical tape on it. It reads the number of inductions that come through that spark plug wire, and that gives you the RPMs and the hour meter. It's just big. They're great. No cutting, splicing, anything. What do you got,
Can
Maggie?
you talk about like the oil, like I know the Power Barrel has oil in it, like.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to work our way back on oil changes. So engine oil changes, we talked about that. Most all of the engines used on a walk-behind tractor are not going to have an oil filter. They're just a splash lubricated engine, which means the engine components are just literally splashing the oil around to lubricate the inside of the engine. There's a very few of the engines that have an oil filter on them. But the diesels will have an oil filter, and those are actually a cleanable oil filter. You don't need to change them every time. And very, very few of the gas engines actually have an oil filter on them. If you see like a spin-on type automotive oil filter on the engine itself, then that needs to be changed. Now this machine has a spin-on type automotive oil filter right there. Now careful inspection of that will show you that it's not on the engine. It's actually on the front of the transmission, okay? This is because this is a hydro machine. See the HY here? This is one of BCS's hydro machines. So all the oil that cycles through that hydrostatic drive has to go through an oil filter because it's going through a hydro pump. So that's what that is. And all the BCS machines that have what they call the power safe clutch, which, yeah, it says power safe right here. You can't see it on this side. It's power safe. That's their hydromechanical wet clutch. They have a filter right in that same location. And you don't know how many people call and say, I need an engine oil filter for my BCS 749. And I'm like, dude, I don't know where you bought this thing, but your dealer did not tell you that that's not an engine oil filter. That's your transmission and clutch filter. That's what that thing is. The engine, the GX390 engine has no oil filter. And nothing BCS has sold in the last 20 years has an oil filter on the engine, unless it was a diesel. And you know, for those of you who might have a machine with a power safe clutch that uses a filter right down in here, you're not going to be able to go to Napa and get a filter. It's a European filter. The first thing we did when we got these machines in is we brought one of the filters down to Napa and we said, hey, match it up. Because we figured, hey, BCS is getting $15 a piece for these filters. We know we can buy them for $7 or $8 at Napa. They matched it up, right? They came up with one with the right threads and the right gasket surface and all that. And luckily, before we actually installed it on a machine, we said, tell us about the check valve, because all oil filters have some kind of a check valve in them. The check valve has to be not only the right strength, it has to go the right direction of flow. Well, it was the wrong direction of flow check valve, because what they had sold us was an automotive oil filter. That's a hydraulic filter. It's different. And even just lining up the externals wasn't near good enough. We'd have roasted that transmission if we'd have put that thing on there. And I'm friends with the guy who is the United Kingdom distributor of BCS over in England. And I emailed him and I said, surely you're not buying BCS's expensive oil filters. He says, yeah, Fram has one. And here's the Fram number. You can buy it at your auto store. So I went to Napa with the Fram number, right? They said, oh, that's a European number. We don't stock that. They said, if you want to buy 1,000, we'll order it for you. I'm like, So what we did then, I had another contact in Italy that they're like an aftermarket parts supplier, and they were able to get the Fram filters for us, and we just bring them in on our containers from Italy. So we're able to offer filters at a more reasonable price than BCS, which is nice, and they're the right filters. But it's not an engine oil filter. Now, moving into that transmission oil change, if you've got a walk-behind tractor, there is oil in the transmission, which is the center part of the machine where the wheels are and everything. If you have the power-safe clutch, and of course you've got the filter to match down there, they want you to change that oil after 30 hours for the initial break-in, and they wanted you to change it every 100 hours of use or once a year thereafter. It'd be nice if they actually provided an hour meter on the machine with those very strict requirements for oil changes, but they don't. But yeah, the oil drain plug for the power-safe machines is right here. If anybody wants to get up and look, we've got a video on our website too, but it's right at the front of the transmission, kind of on that lower side, right on the front of the power, basically directly across from where the oil filter is down here. And to change the oil on that, you would actually remove the implement from the tractor and let the tractor lean all the way forward like this. And then I would do the trick of, again, 2x4 under this wheel, just want to tilt it to the side with the drain plug on it. Let it all drain out, level it up before you put the oil back in. Oh, and I should, finishing up on the engine oil change, I also want to stress that when you're putting oil back in the engine, obviously you want to make sure everything's level. You know, it should be level side to side, so get your 2x4 out of there and level front to back. And with some implements on there, like if you had a tiller on this machine or a sickle bar, it would really sit at an angle like this. Okay, so the engine is up in the air and the tractor's leaning back. Well, the drain, or the fill hole on the engine is on the back side of the engine. It's on the side, but it's on the back side, right? So if the engine's tilted like this and you put oil in until it runs out the hole, you actually didn't get enough oil in the engine. You've got to tilt it up, put a block under the implement or whatever you need to do to get that engine leveled out and fill it up until it runs out the hole. Our practice at my company is on all these engines, Subaru, Honda, whatever, we cut the oil dipstick off the bottom of the cap. Okay, they come with an oil dipstick that's about that long. It's just enough to get you in trouble. Because on an engine like this, if you've got a low oil fill port, that if the oil fill port is down on the kind of the bottom part of the engine, that maximum oil level is that engine will accept is full to overflowing. That's the way that fill plug was designed. So you can't overfill it essentially, right? So you get this little bitty oil dipstick on these things and you have lazy people, right? So they take out the thing and they look at that oil dipstick and there's like this little safe zone, you know, and it's at the bottom of the safe zone and I don't want to go to the shed and get the oil can or whatever, I'm out of oil, so I'll just put it back in because it says it's at the bottom of the safe zone. That's safe, right? So then they go and they mow some 30-degree slope and they wonder why the connecting rod flies out the side of the engine because of an oil starvation. Well, if it's on the bottom of that safe zone, that means it's safe to run the engine on level ground, not at maximum inclination. You need more oil in the engine when you're at maximum inclination, tilting the thing over on its side. So we just eliminated that possibility. Cut all the dipsticks off, fill it till it runs out the hole with the engine level, and you never have an engine low oil failure after that. Now, there are engines out there, like the Briggs Vanguard engines, have like a long extended oil dipstick. Definitely don't want to fill those up till overflowing, because that's not a low oil fill port like these. You know, if that oil fill port is like up here, you know, somewhere at the top of the engine, you're not going to be filling it to overflowing. You want to use the dipstick in that case. So I say if the dipstick's longer than an inch, pay attention to it. So there's that. So transmission oil change, drain out the old, level it back up, refill it. The transmissions all have some kind of an oil plug on top that just pulls out. It's just an O-ring that seals it at the top, so it just pops up out of there. Sometimes they'll get stuck in there from being in there for a long time and they wiggle around and you can't get them out. You can just stick a screwdriver under the lip of the thing, you know, right there and kind of twist it and pop it up out of the top if it's real stiff. In fact, on really old BCS machines, it's very common that people would pull and pull and pull, and they'd pull this black vent cap off the top. It would just pop right off the top of the stick, and they say, oh, my stick is broken. I'm like, no, it's not. Just hammer it back on, put this under the lip, and actually pull the entire dipstick up out of there. So And you want to pay attention to the dipstick on those things and fill it to the right level on the dipstick. You definitely don't want to fill that until it's overflowing on the transmission because you would have no airspace in the transmission at all since that thing is on the top. But 80/90 gear oil is typical for all your gear drive machines with dry clutches. Any Grillo machine has got a dry clutch. Most BCS machines, if it doesn't say power safe on it or hydro, it's a dry clutch. And therefore the 80/90 gear oil is the oil to use in the transmission. Frequency of oil changing is once after the kind of initial break-in period of the unit. So sometime in the first like 10 to 30 hours, go ahead and change that transmission oil. Just to get like any factory grit that might be left over from the machining process out of there. After that, if it's again, a gear drive machine with a dry clutch, once you change that oil the first time, you can leave it in there for 5 years, no problem. I mean, it's like a manual transmission in a truck. How often do you change the oil in that? Most people forget about it, or you stick shift the car. It's just not something you think about because the oil is, it just lasts forever. There's not a lot of impurities getting into it. I do recommend changing it at least every 5 years, just because the oil cap is vented, so moisture could potentially get in there. And if you're a user who's in a hurry sometimes, like I am, and you grind gears while you're shifting, you're going to get little metal flecks floating around in the transmission, and those need to get out of there eventually. Otherwise, they're going to start eating your bearings up. If you grind your gears a lot, change your oil more often. You know this more than I. You're the user. I typically change my gear oil about every 5 years. And there are synthetic gear oils. Again, investing more in a synthetic gear oil will give you a longer life transmission, so I think it's worth the investment. The other thing with gear oils, when you're using that 80W90 or something around that, like a 75W90 is fine as well, you've got to find an oil that's yellow metal safe. Okay. So when I mean yellow metal safe is something that not a lot of people talk about in gear oils because most automotive equipment and big industrial equipment doesn't have any gears in the gearboxes that are bronze or brass gears. But all walk-behind tractors have a bronze worm gear driving the axle. And oils that have compounds in them, there are a lot of, let me rephrase that, there are a lot of gear oils out there that have compounds that are not friendly to any kind of a yellow metal, anything with copper in it. All brass and bronze are both alloys that contain copper. So it's it's a little bit of an old-fashioned requirement because a lot of bronze gearboxes, like I say, have just kind of gone away, but they still have that one bronze worm gear in these walk-behind tractors, and it holds up fine. I mean, I've taken apart 40-year-old tractors, and that bronze worm gear is fine, as long as it's had the right oil in it. But it's got to have a yellow metal safe oil in it. And we have a customer of ours helped us compile a list of yellow metal safe oils, and it's on our website and on our use and maintenance page. So you typically will go to an auto parts store and you'll ask them, is this gear oil yellow metal safe? And they give you this blank look, like you've just spoken in French, and because they've just never heard of this before. But typically what we found is if an oil is yellow metal safe, it'll say so on the bottle. It'll say good for nuts or approved for use in gearboxes with brass or yellow metals or something like this. If the gear oil doesn't mention it at all, it's not safe. That's all there is to it. This is most important when you're using the tractor to pull or push things directly with the axle, like your subsoiler, for example. With a subsoiler or a dozer blade or pulling a trailer, the tractor is doing all its work through the axle, right? PTO isn't doing anything. So all the engine horsepower is being engaged through the wheels, and that brass worm gear, or bronze worm gear, is doing all the work that you are accomplishing. And that's putting more pressure on that gear and more potential wear. So just running a power harrow and a flail mower and a chipper shredder or a snow blower, even if you didn't have a yellow metal safe oil in it, you probably would never screw up that bronze gear anyway, because it's just moving the weight of the tractor around. But when you're doing work that requires the axle torque does the work, then it's most important to get that yellow metal safe oil. So we try to be sticklers about that. On the power safe machines with the power safe clutch, The oil that you're putting in there is actually unihydro fluid, or also called tractor transmission fluid. It's a completely different kind of lubricant. It's the sort of lubricant you would put in a skid steer loader, where the transmission and hydraulic system all operate out of the same oil reservoir. Most, like a skidder, a log skidder, or a bulldozer, they all run that kind of oil. That oil is very common. You can buy it at Tractor Supply. All that stuff is yellow metal safe. So it's all approved. You don't have to worry about that. So if you've got the power safe, that's the kind of oil you want in it, because it's going through a hydraulic system. It's got to be that lighter oil. So questions about oils? We're going to cover implement oil changes in a minute. Yes?
Is there a crush washer or gasket of some sort on the brake fluid?
There are crush washers, yes, and you don't have to replace them every time. I mean, if you use a torque wrench on the thing and really mash the hell out of it, yes, you might have to replace it every time. But drain plugs don't need to be super tight. You just snug them down, and I've used my same crush washers for 10 applications, 10 oil changes. When it gets mashed out to the point where it's, you know, right? It's just like bigger than the actual plug, all mushed out. Just put one on it. I mean, they're cheap. So all the implements have some kind of oil in them. Typically, it's an 80W90 gear oil. They do not require yellow metal safe oil because there's no yellow metals in the gear, in the implements. But if you have yellow metal safe oil for your transmission, there's no problem putting it in the transmission or in the implement as well. And yellow metal safe oil is good to use on all other applications. But implement gear oils just don't need to be changed that often. You've got a sealed gearbox on an implement, and there's no gear grinding occurring because you're not shifting gears in the implement. It's either engaging the power or disengaging the power up in the tractor end of things, and it's just sitting there, you know, two gears usually running together. So implement oil changes, I mean, I've got the same oil in my tiller implement that's been in there for 20 years. It's just, it doesn't leak. I check it once a year to make sure it's up to the proper level, and I just leave it in there. So really, you don't have to get crazy about changing the oil. Implements that have a vent cap. This one actually has a vent cap on the oil. Most implements do not have a vented gearbox, but this one does. And if you've got a vented gear cap or oil cap, there is a little more possibility that moisture could get in there because there is atmosphere moving in and out. So it's probably a good idea every 5 years in a power harrow to change the oil. Getting the original oil out of a power harrow is a real pain in the ass. You ever tried it?
Yeah,
Because
we've done it like once.
yeah, it's like grease. They use this lightweight grease. So you have to choose like a 90-degree day and run the power harrow for a few minutes to kind of loosen it up, and then it's like a really thick gear oil, and you can get it out of there. But if I tried to do this today, I mean, it would be just a cake of grease inside the thing. You couldn't get it out. It's almost easier to take the top off. Did you do that on yours?
No, we just.
You got it out the plug?
And then, so in the, like, Renali, like the manual for the power harrow, it says to use corn head grease,
Yeah.
which I'm like,
It's the same as cotton picker head grease.
so we like special ordered it, because we're like, we're gonna do it right, and
Yeah.
that stuff is so thick.
It is
Trying
thick
to
as
get
well.
it in that tiny
Yes,
little
yes, yes.
process.
Actually, we found that just 85-140 gear oil works fine in the power
Well,
harrows.
now we have the big boxes.
Yeah, well, you're set for life. But yeah, the 85-140 is a little lighter, but it lubricates the gears just fine. We've used that in them for years. A lot easier to get, a lot easier to deal with once you change the oil initially. And most implements don't have grease fittings on them, but if you see grease fittings, like the power harrow has a couple grease fittings, one on the screw crank here, and a couple on the little bearings for the mesh roller. Just pump them like 2 pumps once a year. You don't take a lot. The flail mowers will have bearings on the end with grease fittings on them. The owner's manual will tell you if there's grease fittings, and usually they have like a little grease icon, you know, a little grease gun kind of icon where a grease fitting is going to be. And again, just a couple pumps once or twice a year is all it takes on those applications. There's, you don't have to it's not like an old tractor where you grease and grease and cheese until you see the grease oozing out every place. A few of the old sickle bars, the older model sickle bars were like that. You had to grease it until you saw the oil coming out, or the grease rather, but the modern sickle bars are oil bath transmissions, so you have that. So, anything else? Oil changes. Other general lubrication, if it moves, if it's pivoting, lubricate it. it's just common sense when it comes to equipment. You know, if there's two pieces of metal moving against one another, and you lubricate that joint where it pivots, it's going to last longer, and it's going to wear less, and it's going to work with less effort. So, you know, and it's not something you have to do every day. I mean, once or twice a year, I'll go over my walk-behind tractor with a can of, you know, something like Tri-Flow. This Tri-Flow was the original Teflon lubricant. Invented back in the 70s, maybe early 80s. It was the first thing with Teflon in it that was mass marketed as a lubricant. It's great stuff in terms of staying there for a long time. The Teflon is like a dry lubricant, so once it's in place, like down a cable, you know, inside of a cable, it'll last for years and years. It's a little hard to get, but it's one of the best lubricants we've found. Fluid film is another big favorite of mine. Fluid film is a lanolin-based lubricant. Okay, lanolin is a product of sheep wool, and the sheep have it going now. This particular product was developed in the 60s by the U.S. Navy, and then eventually went to retail sale in the 1980s. But it is one of the best moisture repellents on the planet. Again, sheep, you know, they don't wear raincoats. You can spray this stuff on bare metal, and it will actually repel moisture for 6 months, just exposed to the weather. Just amazing stuff. That's why the U.S. Navy used it. The thing about the fluid film is it sort of coagulates fairly quickly into a very light grease, so it's not a great penetrant. So if you want something to like ooze down inside of a cable, it's not a good choice for that, because you can spray it at the top of the cable and it's not going to like ooze its way all the way down. Something like the Tri-Flow or a penetrating oil like PB Blaster will work its way down a cable. And we have a video on our website showing you how to lubricate cables. You know, you've got all these control cables for your brakes and clutch and reverse and everything else on these things. And, you know, the cables are anywhere between $15 and $25 to replace. And you don't want to have to replace them any more than necessary. The number one thing that happens to cables is that the end of the cable, like the upper end where the lever pulls on it, has this sintered on, kind of welded on little knob, right? And that's what the lever is pulling on to activate that cable. That knob pops off. That's 99% of the time what happens where a cable dies, is the top end pops off. Well, that top end is going to pop off a lot quicker if the cable has more resistance in it, and that knob has to do more work to drag it up through the sheet. So keeping that some lubricant between the cable and the sheet that it runs in will just make everything last longer. So I always tilt my handlebars up like this. You pull a lever up like this, you can see the cable exposed right here, okay? So if it doesn't have an automatic lock to hold this lever in, you can just put a bungee around it or slip a piece of pipe over it to keep it squeezed, and then spray a little bit of oil right on that cable, and it'll go downhill, because I have these handlebars tilted up, run down inside the cable sheath and go all the way down. It'll get directed through this adjustment bolt. Basically, the end of this sheath is just pulled up against the inside of this adjustment bolt. But by putting some tension on it like this, I'm pulling the end of that sheath back tight against that adjustment bolt, essentially sealing it up, so that when I introduce lubricant up here, it'll run down through the adjustment bolt and be directed into the cable sheath and go down. So I tie up all my things like this. They've got a interesting little thing here which does the same thing. And you just, once a year, you kind of start at one end, lubricate all the cables, you know, whichever they are, and on these exposed cables down here, right where it goes into the adjustment bolt. And then once you're done with the 6 cables or whatever, you come back over to this end, you know, because you're giving it time to seep down in there. It takes 10 minutes, or I can do it while I'm doing an oil change. The engine's, you know, draining its oil up here, or I'm cleaning the air filter, and I'll come over here, spray these down, go do something else, come back, spray them down. When you see oil starting to ooze out the bottoms of the cables, it's totally lubricated, right? And you've just increased your life of that cable a year. And you're like, that's so much easier. Silicone lubricant, graphite lubricant, there's a lot of good lubricants out there. What you don't want to use is some cheap penetrating oil like WD-40, which evaporates after 2 weeks. I mean, there's a reason that stuff is so cheap. I mean, you pay a little more to get a good penetrating oil with some kind of a dry lubricant quality that will stay once the carrier evaporates off. So silicone, Teflon, you know, graphite, lots different products with those in there. And all the pivot points, like where the handlebars go up and down here, okay? That's pivoting on some U-bolts, basically, that clamp the handlebars down into place. The same on the Grillo. On the Grillo, the U-bolts are going up, and the BCS, the U-bolts are going down. There's lock nuts on the ends of those U-bolts. Now this is getting a little loose. See what happened there? I pushed the release lever for the handlebars, and they dropped at their own weight. That's too loose. So what's going to happen is if we don't adjust that, eventually the handlebars will just start wiggling. Where they pivot at the top, you're just going to get some extra slop, and things are going to start wearing unevenly, and you'll have some breakage. I think you broke the height adjustment pin a couple times on yours, and this happens often because this gets too loose. So this is just we have a video on this. You have the tri-flow spilled in there, so everything, I can't even hold on to it, it's so slick. But yeah, I can go under here and just tighten these bolts down, or these nuts rather, down a little bit. I have to push them down. That's what you want. Not much. It's not like I have to, you know. You just have to exert a little bit of effort to get them to go down or up. And that's fine. That's snug. That's where you want it. On the BCS tractors, there's also on all these walk-behind tractors, there's an offset built into the handlebars so you can go side to side. On the BCS and Grillo, at least on any of the BCSs built within the last 20 years, there's a way to adjust how much slop is on that pivot post, right? You got a post in the middle that the handlebars are pivoting on left to right. And there's a bolt-in nut right under here that you crank down to, it basically pushes a tapered bushing in against the pivot post. This one's a pretty new tractor. This still feels right. You know, it feels fine. There's no slop this way. But if this hadn't been adjusted in 10 years, I could just take the handlebars and like rock them around like this. You could tell when, I mean, they move with a little bit of resistance. You can't tell much, but I'm not, you know, if I push them, they just kind of stop pretty quick. You know, they're not like just flying around. If they do that, it's time to adjust your pivot post tension a little bit. Grillo has a little bit of different system. They have a clamp that closes together onto the pivot post. But again, that's all adjustable and it's all lubricatable. You can take your spray grease or whatever, your Teflon, spray that pivot post down. Hit your, right here, there's your U-bolts right there where the handlebars pivot up and down. You can hit that with a little lubricant, you know, because otherwise it's going to get squeaky. Things start wearing when they're not lubricated. They might well start wearing into each other. Here's your pivot post. You can spray it right down into the pivot post. On the Grillo, it looks a little different. The handlebars kind of come down over the pivot post, but there's a slot at the back where you can spray lubrication in there. Lube them up. Everything that moves, keep it lubed. How are we for time? We've got till 12:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we gotta have that. Okay. All right, so this particular tractor doesn't have the BCS feature that causes a lot of trouble, but I'll kind of mock it up anyway. On a lot of your older BCS machines, and even on some of the current BCS machines, when you turn the handlebars around, the PTO rod, this is your power takeoff engagement, the entire rod, like all the way down to the tractor here, has to rotate around when you bring your handlebars around. This one is different, it rotates on the top. But, you know, the Hydro model is the only one that does this. All the other models have this vertical lever, this short vertical lever has to make a spin around. And it basically rotates in a little steel socket at the bottom. And those things seize up like nobody's business. It's terrible design. I wish they'd have put a grease fitting on it. They finally have redesigned the system so that it's less likely to freeze up for the past year or two. So that's good. But so many machines out there in the field where, I mean, the smart thing to do is just, you know, where that rod goes into that little socket at the bottom, give it a little shot of lubricant every now and then. Just keep it free. Because when they seize up, they're there to get loose. I mean, because it just seizes in there hard, and you gotta, get out the torch and heat it up and soak it with penetrating oil for a couple of days. But that, it's something you never have to deal with on the Grillo machines because they pivot around on the top the way these do. Well, actually, to spin the handlebars around on the Grillo, you take these pins out and relocate the handles. It takes another few seconds, but it's actually more reliable in the long run. Pardon? Just, have some extra pins around because you will drop the pins. Yeah, but keep that thing lubricated. And if you have one that is seized up at the bottom, because a lot of times, you'll sell a tractor to somebody and they say, maybe they only buy soil working implements with it, and they run soil working implements on it for the first 5 years, so they never turn the handlebars around. So there's no need to pivot it around. They never even know that it pivots around, so they forget all about it. Never think of lubricating it. And then one day I'm going to buy a flail mower, I'm going to buy a chipper shredder, or whatever it is. So then they go to turn it around the first time, and it ain't going. So what do? They go over this way. They go over this way. They say, well, it looks like it'll pivot that way, but see how it stops right there? Well, they just force it past that. Things break, and we sell the parts. Because what's built into this, the reason that it has to pivot around to do its job on the BCS machines is because built into that PTO rod is a safety that keeps you from engaging the PTO when you're in reverse, right? Because they don't want you tilling your feet up when this thing comes back at you. So that safety is sort of integrated into that design, and when you turn the handlebars around, the thing is, now the tractor goes this way to do work, right? This is forward now. So it has to be able to engage the PTO while moving forward, otherwise your mower or your snowblower wouldn't work. So that safety, as this thing spins around, it disengages the safety. Safety is on one side of the lever. That's why it has to spin. So by trying to go over this way, they're just trying to defeat the safety. And sometimes they get it to work. They physically get it over this way. The joint breaks. They put some duct tape on it to hold it together. They say, my PTO won't engage. Yeah, because the tractor still thinks that the handlebars are on this side. These beauty shrouds in the BCS, they're utterly useless. Just want to say that. In fact, this one is already missing one of the rubber grommets that held it down. There's just these little tits on the bottom here. You go through these rubber grommets. They pop out all the time. This is the dumbest design I've ever seen. Whatever. Before you put the little things through the grommets, you've got to have a little lubricant. A little spilled tri-flow will do nicely. If these are dry and you try to put it on, it will push the grommet right out the bottom, which is what happened on this one right over here. Somebody did that previous to me. Yeah, it gets like 1 mile better to the gallon. This thing. Aerodynamics. But it's Italian. It's got to look good. Who cares about function? But yeah, a lot of people will put those things on. Because the cables kind of bind up under there too, right? It's a silly design. And if you have a BCS machine, you have one of these things, and you need the racing stripes on it for whatever reason, just make sure when you put this thing on, see this pocket between the two little tits here? That's not where the cables go. If you orient the cables right between those things, put it down there, that looks good, it holds them in. Then you turn the handlebars around, you kink every single cable. That's not what they're for. I wish they would just put a divider or put a piece of something between there so people couldn't do it. Now the cables have to come off to this side because the handlebars go around this way. The cables have to be able to flow off to that side. Again, something you don't have to deal with in the Grillo machines. But it's just what it is. That side. All right, adjusting cables. Since you've got cables all over these machines, brake, clutch, whatever, reverse, all the cables are going to stretch, right? They're going to stretch, they're going to wear a little bit, and over the lifespan of the cable, you're going to adjust it several times, probably. All the cables are equipped with adjustment bolts. We talked about that earlier when we talked about the lubrication of the cables. These are a very standard type of adjustment bolt used on motorcycles for 100 years. Okay, motorcycles are all cables for the clutches and brakes. Same deal. It is a hollow bolt that the cable runs through the center of. And in order to adjust it, you're just going to loosen the jam nut, which is the nut, the larger nut at the base of the bolt, and then you're going to turn the bolt in or out. And a lot of people get confused about what direction you need to go to tighten your cable. But it's simple. You just think about, okay, if you've got extra slack in the cable that you want to get rid of, therefore the cable is too loose, what you want to do is your cable is anchored here at the lever. You want to push the sheath further away from the anchor point because that uses up your slack, right? So that means screwing this bolt out. More threads exposed on the adjustment bolt. If you back that bolt out, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter on the cable. So that's the direction that will tighten it. And now this machine is a bad example because it's one of these hydro things. It has just the bottom ends of the cables have these little eyelets on them. But typically on a walk-behind tractor, the lower end of the cable is just in a clamp. It's just a clamp that like pinches onto the side of the cable to pinch the cable in place on whatever it's pulling on a lever or whatever. And that's another place you could potentially adjust it. That is, you can loosen that little clamp, slide it up or down the cable, and get more adjustment out of it that way. But it's crazy to try to adjust it at the end if you've still got adjustment in these bolts. Use the bolts first. That's what they're for. They're an adjustment bolt. So screw it out or in as needed, whether you're tightening or loosening the cable. And when you run out of adjustment on the bolt, that's when you would go to the bottom end and reset that clamp. And say, if I had run this bolt all the way out to take as much slack out of as I could out of the cable, and I still need to take more slack, before I reset that clamp, I'm going to run this bolt back in, right? So that I reset my bolt at the top. Now I reset my clamp at the bottom. Now I've got a whole new bolt, right? I've got a whole new bolt's worth of adjustment. And now I can do the fine adjustment. It's impossible to do a fine adjustment down at the bottom of the clamp because that clamp has pinched into the cable and made a bend in it and a pockmark in it, and it's kind of messed it up. And when you get that clamp, when you get the bolt loosened up and you get the clamp moving a little bit, you're not going to move it 1/8 of an inch. You have to move it like at least an entire clamp width, right? Which is going to be like 1/2 an inch or something like this. It's easier if you move it further, frankly, because you're on an unmessed up section of cable at that point. So you move it where you move it, and then tighten it down, and then use this for your fine adjustment, getting it perfect. And one of the things that gets adjusted the most is your reverser and your clutch, because you're using those all the time. And with the reverse, and again, this is a damn hydro tractor, so we can't demonstrate it exactly, but this is basically the reverse lever on the side of the transmission, both on a BCS and a Grillo, is a lever that moves forward and back, right on the side of the transmission. You can always know what it is. You can work your reverse control, and you can see it move down there. And there's a big rod and a spring right next to it. And that spring is the return spring, because the cable is going to pull it one direction, the spring is going to pull it back the other direction, okay? That lever moves within a stop. There's a stop on the transmission that looks something like this. It's got just a piece of steel with 2 little stops. That lever has to move within that stop. So when its spring is going to pull it one way against the stop, the lever should hit the stop in the opposite direction. And you adjust the cable so that when the lever is fully pulled back, it's up against the other stop. If the cable stretches or components wear, and when it's all the way pulled back into reverse, it's like not touching the stop by 1/4 inch. That's enough for the gears not to engage. You just get a grinding noise, and the tractor's not going to go anywhere. So that's, get that phone call 100 times a year, easy. The reverse is out of my tractor, it needs a new gearbox. I'm like, okay, explain the problem to me. And I listen to the symptoms. I'm like, have you adjusted your forward and reverse? No. Watch this video and adjust your forward and reverse. 9 times out of 10, that solves the problem.
My tractor needs that right now.
Yes. Right. So, yeah. Now with clutches, it differs between clutch style. There's with the hydro style clutch, you don't really have to worry too much about the clutch lever adjustment, because all you're moving with the clutch valve, what you're moving with these levers is literally just valve bodies down there, because it's a hydraulic system. But any of the older style tractors, and even like the BCS 853s, which are still currently sold, have a dry clutch, a non-hydraulic clutch. And the clutch adjustment is therefore important on those things. And then the Grillo machines also have, the older Grillos had a standard, what we call the standard clutch. The newer ones, like Maggie's, have what we call an active clutch. The active clutch is a different sort of idea that Grillo came up with in 2017, and it's really cool, actually. Actually, they came out on the 110. They came out with it in 2015, I think. That was the first tractor that had it. Anyway, so on a BCS machine, you've typically got these two levers, right? A red lever and a black lever on the bottom. The bottom one is considered your clutch lever. The top one is your safety lever, okay? So on a BCS, say an 853, which is a dry clutch, standard tractor, if you let the red lever go, it kills the engine. It's your safety lever, it's your idiot lever. Grillo, with the inception of their active clutch, they did away with everything on the bottom. There's no lever on the bottom anymore. There's just a red lever on the top, and it's straight up when it's not being activated, it's in the resting position. And you push it all the way down to the handlebar. And what that does is it engages the clutch. So the one control takes place of both the clutch and the safety lever, because on the Grillo active style clutch, when you let go of it, the clutch just opens and the tractor stops. So the difference here is that if you think about a truck or a car with a stick shift in it, or a tractor, or a motorcycle, you're either squeezing the clutch lever, if it's a motorcycle or ATV, or you're pushing the clutch pedal to open the clutch, okay? That disengages power from the engine to everything else so that you can shift gears. And then when you let off the handle or you let up the clutch, power is re-engaged and you move, okay? That's a standard clutch. The standard clutch that everybody's used to is normally closed. That is, its normal resting position is the plates are pushing together, transferring power. Engine's on this side, transmission's on this side. So by engaging your clutch linkage, pushing your clutch lever, you're opening the clutch so that the engine can run without the transmission turning. This turns, this does not. And it pushes back together. The active clutch, they call it the active clutch because you actively have to push down the lever to close the clutch. Then when you let up on it, there's a little spring that just opens the clutch up. So its normal position is open rather than closed. This is a way they met the new European safety standard in a very simple and cost-effective way. So the new safety standard came out in 2011 and said any walk-behind soil working piece of equipment has to have a safety system that disengages drive within half a second, like that. Just killing the engine wasn't enough anymore. All the old style things, you let it go and it would kill the engine. Well, let me tell you, if you've got a diesel engine on this thing and it's running at full 3,600 RPMs, it takes several seconds for that engine to wind down with a 40-pound flywheel on it. So it continues chewing your leg off as it goes. So they wanted a system that stopped the power right now. Grillo went to the active clutch, just normally open. It's really simple. Instead of a heavy spring pushing the clutch plates together all the time, they simply have a light spring opening the clutch up all the time, and you provide the pressure through leverage. You know, there's a bunch of leverage built into the clutch linkage. So when you push it all the way down, it's not terribly fatiguing. I mean, people look at that and they think, I don't want to hold that down all day. But the way the geometry in the control is such that when it comes all the way down, it sort of over centers a little bit. You can hold it down with just like one thumb. And you don't need a big mitt to run it. With the BCS machines, you get some complaints sometimes that it's a long reach. It takes a strong hand. So the Grillo sort of eliminates that. BCS is, the way BCS met that new safety system, or the new safety requirement in Europe, was with the hydrostat clutch. Not the hydrostat, but their power safe, their hydromechanical clutch. Because basically the engine runs an oil pump, the oil pump runs a little hydraulic system inside the clutch pack, and the plates of the clutch are pushed together by hydraulic pressure. When you let go of the safety, or when you squeeze the clutch lever, hydraulic flow stops and the thing just pops open because there's an internal spring that opens it up. So it's kind of it's a normally open clutch as well, but it's using hydraulic pressure to push it closed. The result is it upped the price of the tractor by $300 and made it a hell of a lot harder for people to service it on their own. If something breaks in a power safe clutch system, almost always they've got to ship it back to a dealer. It's just a pain in the ass to work on, so I'm not a big fan of those. But they are easier to use because the effort to squeeze the clutch handle is a little less. because you're not moving a big spring anymore, you're just moving a valve. So there's some advantage to that. But the adjustment on the clutch, okay, the adjustment on the clutch is sort of opposite, because for years and years we were dealing with just standard dry clutches, which is the normally closed clutch. And with that, the thing that happens is as your clutch surfaces wear, okay, you've got the clutch surface is always, you've got one steel surface and there's another part that has like what a brake shoe looks like? It's kind of that fibrous material. That's on the other half, so that pushes up against it, and that's your sacrificial material that wears away eventually, your clutch lining. As that lining wears away, basically the clutch, the way the BCS clutch is made, it's sort of a cone within a cone. So you've got an inner cone and an outer cone, and the sacrificial material is on the inner cone. And as it wears, it will nest further into the outer cone, which means more of the clutch, like the throwout bearing where the clutch engagement lever happens, pushes out. So essentially what happens, end of the day, the more your clutch wears, the more slack disappears out of the cable. That is, the cable gets tighter as the clutch wears. People don't think, everybody thinks of things getting looser as they wear. But with a standard clutch on a BCS, this is 732, 853, anything with a clutch that, if you've got a BCS where you let go of the red lever and it kills the engine, you've got a dry clutch, okay, a dry standard clutch. And that means that as that clutch wears, the cable's gonna get tighter and tighter. And the danger here, well, not only does it become more difficult to squeeze the lever because you're having to reach further down to get the lever because it keeps getting pulled further and further away from the handlebar, but also if that cable, if you run out of slack in the cable and you haven't done anything, you just ignored it, you're gonna burn your clutch up. Because what happens eventually, once there's no more slack left in the cable and it's just bowstring taut all the time, like this, okay? Then the surfaces of that clutch that are being pressed together can't really fully mate. It's just like you're riding with your foot half on the clutch in a vehicle. You're gonna smoke the clutch. Don't ride the clutch. So you're riding it kind of all the time by the cable being too tight. And then, so they'll till with it. Tilling is a relatively minor load. Running a power harrow is a minor load. It hardly works the engine at all. So you can get by with a pretty tight clutch cable. But then they turn the handlebars around and put a flail mower on it, and they smoke the clutch in 5 minutes. Because not only is the flail mower 10 times the horsepower requirement, but by turning the handlebars around, it curves all the cable sheaths around and takes extra slack out of the cable. You'll always notice on a walk-behind tractor that your cables get tighter when you have the handlebars oriented on the engine side of the machine. It's just the way it is. I mean, when you bend those cable sheaths, it's eating up a little bit of the space inside the sheath and therefore using up some of the slack in the cables. So, had that phone call 100 times, probably 1,000. On the active clutch, it's the opposite. Since the clutch cable and linkage is actually doing the pushing to engage that clutch, you want it as tight as possible. And as that clutch wears, the cable will get looser. Okay, so on the Grillo active clutch, if you push down the clutch lever to make the machine go, you've got an active clutch on your Grillo. And what you want to do is you want to adjust it, we have a video on this of course, so that when your handle is like less than a quarter down, as soon as you start to bring it down, the tractor should start to move. If you have to bring it down halfway before the tractor even starts to go, time to adjust your clutch cable. First adjust it with the little hollow bolt. If that doesn't do it, go to the bottom and reset the clamp. But yeah, if you fail to do that, if you let it get to the point where you're pushing it down like half or 3/4 of the way before it even engages, you're going to smoke your clutch because there's not enough pressure on it to keep it from slipping. So just a little maintenance, it's not something you have to do that often. I mean, I usually adjust my clutch once or twice a year on my current tractor. So it's, now, if you abuse the clutch, like ride it on purpose, using the clutch as a speed control, which it is not, Your gear shift is your speed control, and your throttle lever is your speed control. Your clutch is not your speed control. It should be engaged or disengaged, right? You can slip it just a little bit to get an implement started a little bit. If you've got a high torque implement like a chipper shredder, which has a 40-pound flywheel in it, you need to get that spinning. So you let it out a little slow. You'll just dump it. But other than that, you shouldn't be like riding that clutch halfway because you're just going to overheat the thing. But if you do that, if you have somebody using the tractor who's a little unsure and they just I don't want to bog the engine too much, so you slip the clutch a little too much, you're going to wear the line prematurely and have to adjust your clutch more often. So, yeah. So, yeah, not the end of the world, just needs a little more adjustment. But any questions about any of that?
So if you respect the machine and do the required maintenance, preventative maintenance, all that stuff, is the clutch probably is that going to be the next wear item or the first thing to?
Yeah, the clutch is one of your first wear items. Yeah, I mean, the BCS clutches will typically run about 1,000 hours of service. In that time, they'll usually need to be rebuilt once because the bearings go out. There's a couple throwout bearings in there that are sealed throwout bearings. They just go out eventually and need to be changed. What happens when the throwout bearings go bad is the clutch doesn't disengage power fully. You squeeze the clutch and the tractor keeps creeping a little bit. And the Grillos will do it too. If the throwout bearing gets bad on the Grillo, you let go of the clutch in that case, and the tractor just keeps creeping a little bit. Time for throwout bearings. I mean, they're fairly cheap. We can rebuild a BCS clutch for about $60. Grillo's about the same. The Grillo clutch pack, the way that they've made the clutch system on the active clutch units, it's very easy to service because there's no heavily charged spring in the clutch. So it's very owner serviceable. I mean, I have a video where it's a 7-minute uncut video, and I put a clutch in the Grillo machine. Bang. It's 7 volts. And you'll do it a little more often on the Grillo machines because they don't have quite as much lining surface. But it's also half the cost, or it's actually about a quarter the cost. Because a new BCS clutch, to get a new lining in a BCS, you have to replace the whole clutch. They don't sell the lining separately. You get the throwout bearing separately, but not the lining. BCS clutch is $300. Grillo clutch pack, which is all the wearing components of the clutch, is like $89, but you'll have to do it more often. So it's kind of a toss-up. So, yeah, but yeah, I run one of these machines with 7 implements on my farm. I'm not a production farmer. I sell to market farmers now. I'm not a market farmer at this point in my life, but I still maintain a whole property with one of these machines. I have a quarter-mile driveway, and do gravel and snow maintenance on. I have the tiller, I have the lawnmower. These things do have a lawnmower, so you can do lawn maintenance with it. I've mowed my lawn for 30 years with one of these machines. I actually do quite a bit of gardening with my lawnmower because I have the bagger. I have the grass bagger, and all that mulch goes on my garden. Big mulch garden. I have a bush hog, do a lot of bush hogging with it. I got a chipper shredder, I got a potato digger plow, dig a lot of potatoes. And, so I'm putting several hundred hours of machine on the machine here. And, I'm using a 98 model machine. It's an old BCS. And the thing is just cranks on, And I do not baby it. I use my machine hard, but I take care of it at the same time. That is, I demand a lot from it, but I don't try to push it past its mechanical limits. I have seen the machine jumping up and down trying to use a rotary plow in ground that was it was old fill dirt mixed with rocks, and I was trying to plow up this woman's garden, one of my employees, in the middle of the drought, in one of our record droughts. It was literally like brick. I was down a foot with this rotary plow, and there's no sign of moisture. It was just clay and rocks. And the machine was bucking like this, and I'm like, I'm gonna snap the PTO off. I'm gonna snap the PTO off. It never snapped. So, yeah, they're tough. Oh, another thing, if you get something jammed in an implement, don't flip the machine on its side so you can get it unjammed, because that's a 4-cycle engine. If you put it on its side, oil's going to run where it should not run. And you're going to get oil in your carburetor, on top of your cylinder head, and everywhere else. This is a 4-cycle engine, so like every 4-cycle engine, it has to stay relatively upright. You can tilt it up to about 40 degrees anyway, but not on its side. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say especially on the Power Hero, lift it in check for, if you have long pieces of weeds or whatever, they'll get wrapped under there.
Yeah.
metal stakes are always in there.
Yeah, any rotary implement,
Right,
period. I mean, it's just a good idea to tilt it up every now and then while it's off the tractor. Yeah, just take it off the tractor. Your quick coupling makes that real easy. Flip the thing up on its side or over on its top. Just watch if you have a vented gear oil plug, which the power harrows do, and I think maybe the flail mowers do. So if you leave them flipped over completely upside down for long enough, you're going to lose a little gear oil. So you'll have to top it back off. But if you just stand it up on its side, to, to clean some stuff out of it, because anytime, like obviously you've got a gearbox here in your implement, and it's got oil in it. So you've got oil seals where the drive shafts are coming out of there. So if you wrap up a bunch of crap, twine, baling wire, whatever is in your garden, fishing line, you get that. People put that up for deer preventative stuff, and it winds in. Fishing line is hell on oil seals because it's so small and it's so tough, and it winds in real tight around the shafts. Pantyhose, found a lot of pantyhose and tillers. I don't know what they're doing in their gardens, but yeah. I know what they're doing. They're putting the human hair clippings in the pantyhose and hanging them out in the garden, which is supposed to be deer repellent. Or they're doing other funky things. I don't know. But it wraps up in tillers really well and hits the oil seals. As I said, I've got the same gear oil in my tiller, which is actually a 98 model tiller, so it's like over 20 years old. Because once a year or twice a year, I clean all the crap around that wraps up on the tine shaft. And you get stuff that wraps up, weeds or just things you don't know that are there. It'll find things in your soil that you didn't know were there. But if you let them build up on any rotating implement, you're going to get into trouble. It's going to eat up your oil seals, and you're going to have the oil leak out. And if you don't touch it, you're going to damage the gears because there's no oil at that point. So it's just common sense kind of stuff. So. And I'm not going to get into the belly of the gearboxes on these things because it's something you rarely have to do. What I've ran over today is 90% of what you're ever going to do to maintain your walk-behind tractor. So, yeah. Any other last-minute questions? But yeah, I mean, I spend probably $20 or $30 a year maintaining my machine, and it's that old, and I get that much service out of it. So these things are just very reliable. I did have to replace the engine a few years ago. Actually, my first engine outlasted my first clutch outlasted my first engine. I got almost 2,000 hours out of my first clutch. I got 1,800 hours on the first engine. So, yeah, clutches can last a whole lot. Now, I put throw-out bearings in it twice during that period. So, yeah, the clutch lining was still good. Yep. Keep the tires filled. Just seems really basic and dumb, but a lot of these are tube-type tires on all these machines. If you let the tire pressure get too low, the rim will spin inside the tire, and it'll slice the valve stem right off. And then you got no tube. You can't put a patch on that. The tube is done. So
I've never put an air in my tires.
we've aired them when you brought it out to our place.
Okay.
But you should, at least once a year, put a gauge on it. Because the thing is, look, this machine doesn't weigh enough to squat the tires down when the tire pressure is low, right? So you could have 4 psi in those tires, and they would look just like they do right now, because the sidewalls are so stiff on the tires that they just don't squat, right? It doesn't weigh enough, so you can't just rely on looking at it. You've got to put a gauge on it. Well, what happens is, there's a tube inside the tire, right? And the tube is blown up, and that's what makes the tire stand up. But if the bead of the tire is sort of stuck to the metal rim by pressure, by the tube pressure pushing it against there. Well, if there's insufficient pressure in the tube, then the rim, the metal rim, can slip against the bead of the tire. So if you're putting the tractor in a hard pull and you don't have enough PSI in your tires, the rim, which is what's being driven by the axle, will slip inside the tire. And then all that's driving you is the valve stem coming off your tube. The valve stem is projected through the hole in the rim, right there, and it just tears that valve stem right out of the tube. And your tube is done. Now you've got to take it apart and put the tube in the tire. So as long as you keep at least 10 PSI, we recommend 15 to 20 pounds, but at least 10 will keep it from slipping. Just a very basic thing, but the point is you can't just rely on the visuals. You have to put a gauge on to make sure there's enough air in it. Just once a year, typically, unless you're running over a bunch of thorns and chapters too. Okay, thank you all. Thank you.
Don't forget your feedback. Please just leave it on the table and I'll pick it up. It's lunchtime.